Lake Baikal, located in Siberia, Russia, is the world's largest and oldest freshwater lake. It contains 1/5 of our planet's fresh water, and is estimated to be 25 to 30 million years old. For reference, it's roughly the same size as the country of Belgium, and is also the deepest lake in the world, measuring more than 5,300 feet. It's beautiful and inviting in the warm summer months, but by winter, it can completely freeze over. The area endures massive earthquakes that occasionally cause the framing mountains and the lake itself to shift. Lake Baikal is home to around 1,500 species, of which 80% are estimated to be endemic, meaning you won't find them anywhere else on Earth. However, strange phenomena surrounding the body of water lead some to think there may be more unknown inhabitants. Several eyewitness reports throughout the years explain seeing saucer-shaped aircrafts hovering near Lake Baikal. Flying bright orbs have also been seen near the water on various occasions. Some locals believe Lake Baikal is a spiritual area, and that it's a place for otherworldly creatures to visit. But what about the creatures that don't visit us from above, but dwell in the depths beneath? Lake Baikal is well known as a training ground for the Soviet military. In 1982, a group of divers called frogmen were routinely training in the water when suddenly several humanoid figures approached them. These creatures had no scuba equipment, such as air tanks or respirators, which was odd considering they were over 150 feet deep and the water was extremely cold. Instead, they each wore a metallic skin-tight suit and a sphere helmet device concealing their head. The group claims that each being was approximately 10 feet tall. After a few moments of interaction, the creatures swam away. After the encounter, the commander soon ordered his divers to go after the humanoids in order to catch one. 7 frogmen quickly returned to the water and made their descent, this time armed with a large net. Remarkably, they were able to find these creatures again. But as they went in to capture one, an unknown force ejected each diver out of the water with immense speed. Because the frogmen were propelled through the water from a great depth, they did not have time to perform decompression stops. This led to 4 of them getting the bends, and subsequently 3 passing away due to a lack of decompression chambers readily available. The others affected received life-altering disabilities. In March of 2021, researchers deployed an underwater telescope into Lake Baikal to study neutrinos, one of the tiniest elementary particles. Postulated in the 1930s and discovered in the 1950s, neutrinos are still being studied. They are 1 million times less massive than electrons and rarely interact with other matter. This is important because neutrinos could give insight on the workings of galaxies and the universe. They could provide new information for not only what dwells in the Earth's depths, but also what exists outside of our planet. We will altogether understand the universe. We will reveal its history, how galaxies were born. What is happening at Lake Baikal, and why are there so many paranormal encounters? What ejected those frogmen from the water on that day in 1982? Some theorize that there is an underwater extraterrestrial base in the lake, that aliens have used this location to hide from our view, but settled on our planet. Others believe the humanoid figures to be ancient subaqueous giants that have always lived among us, that this has been their home for millennia, and that we are the intruders. Less than 100 years ago, an elementary particle was discovered and is now being researched with subatomic underwater telescopes. It's undeniable that there are phenomena we have yet to explain, whether that be on our own Earth or in the universe. Me and my mother used to live in this fairly big apartment. I was 12 years old at the time. From the day we moved in, I noticed something was off about the house. All of our plants started dying. Our dogs would frequently bark at nothing, which they never did before, and just in general, this uneasy feeling like you were being watched or weren't safe. We tried to shrug it off as we had a very tough time finding a place to live, and it was a beautiful apartment. I would often be home alone, as my mom is a single mother and worked a lot growing up to provide for us. I would never stay upstairs when I was alone, even though my room was there. I was utterly petrified to be there alone and had this feeling that something could happen to me. Whenever I would try to sleep, I felt as if something were watching me through my window. One day, I was vacuuming the house while I was alone, not thinking about much, when suddenly I heard a laugh right behind me, like so close I could feel a warmth on my neck. It was a very menacing, creepy laugh, like you might imagine it to be. I immediately turned around and saw nothing. I turned the vacuum off, but I heard nothing. I felt so unsafe, but my mom was pretty strict, and I knew she would be mad if the house wasn't clean, so I kept vacuuming. As soon as I started cleaning again, the laugh crept up behind me again, plus the warmth on my neck. I truly felt as if my life were in danger. I turned the vacuum off and I turned around to yet again find nothing behind me. My stomach turned. I started crying and ran to the kitchen to get a knife to defend myself. I ended up staying crouched behind the counters, crying until my mom got home. I don't know how long that was, but it felt like forever. We ended up moving shortly after because of several issues we were having. We were never happy in that apartment. It was just an awful energy. One of my mom's close friends is a psychic, and I've known her since I was very little. We hadn't told her anything that we felt in that place. On the day that we were moving, she came to help us clean up the place. The first thing she said when she walked into the apartment was, "A man died in here. He hung himself upstairs." I was driving with my mom, and it was a beautiful sunny day. Not one drop of rain, not one gust of wind. Simply perfect. While driving, we went under a bridge that we drive through every day in order to get home. Once we were under the bridge, it started snowing heavily, like really heavily. There were huge chunks of snowflakes flying at us. That wouldn't be weird in itself, as we live in a place that can snow quite heavily. However, this only lasted for the 2 seconds that we were under the bridge. Then it was beautiful weather again, as soon as we came out. We both said what the hell and confirmed that we saw the same thing. Not exactly creepy, but it kind of shocked me for a bit. When I was around 13 or 14 years old, I had a dream that me and my mom were in Holland in a hotel to see my stepdad's daughter. When they were checking into the hotel, I saw my mom, but in the dream, I couldn't see my stepdad John. From the back, it looked like him, but when he turned around, it was someone else, and that's when I woke up. A couple of weeks later, my mom and stepdad John went to Holland to see his 2 daughters, so we checked into the hotel. Bear in mind, I told no one about the dream, because I didn't want people to think I was crazy. We were checking into the hotel, and where I was standing, I saw everyone, and everyone was the same from my dream. I thought I saw John, my stepdad, but it wasn't him, and when the guy turned around, it was the same man from my dream. I got the biggest chills up and down my body. It has to be the weirdest and most surreal feeling of my life. And that's how my dream turned into reality. I've driven solo from California to Massachusetts twice, and from Massachusetts to California once. It's always an adventure to recall the amazing journey, especially where I stay, as sleeping is very important. In 2016, I left Southern California via the 15 freeway after spending time near Big Sur, and made it and slept at a rest stop near St. George, Utah. Day 2, I cleared Colorado, and near eastern Colorado, entering into the Nebraska border, I noticed something interesting. In this region, it's all flat, and for 30 to possibly 50 or so miles, in the distance off the 76 highway in Colorado into Route 80 in Nebraska, there are these endless sets of high-tension wires with red lights, only visible at night. I've never seen anything like it, but I'm sure many people know what I'm talking about. So I slept near North Platte at a 24-hour McDonald's parking lot that night. Day 3, I made it to Indiana and slept at a rest stop there and made it to Massachusetts around 2 a.m. the next night. Driving from California to Massachusetts the second time was last summer, and I took over a week and stayed at motels each night. But the weird thing is what happened on my trip back to California last summer. So I had to drive directly through and make it a fast trip. Night 1 was a rest stop in Ohio. Night 2, I made it to Omaha, Nebraska and slept at another rest stop. When I left Nebraska, it was about 8 a.m. the next morning. And since there was a snowstorm in Colorado last August 2020, I decided to stay on Route 80 and cross Wyoming instead. I crossed the Wyoming border around 8 to 9 p.m. after clearing Nebraska. What's completely strange is maybe an hour or so into Wyoming, on Route 80 at night, I noticed a similar 30 to 50 mile stretch of high-tension wires with red lights, like I saw 4 years earlier, really looking like radar towers or something. I can pretty much recall all events in my life in general with great specificity. However, I can't explain this night, because the only thing I recall is driving west, noticing these strange, endless towers for maybe half an hour, and thinking how I've seen them before. But my next conscious memory is it being 8 a.m. the next morning, and me driving into the Salt Lake City area. I totally lost the night. It was just as if I was driving, looking at these towers and lights, and in the blink of an eye, it's the next morning and I'm driving in Utah in daylight. I didn't notice this glitch at the time. I didn't sleep at all in Wyoming or Utah, as I would recall the exact lot and surroundings of my sleeping area. A time glitch of some kind is the only thing I can think of, and maybe these weird towers have something to do with it. I have no memory of stopping to sleep whatsoever in Wyoming or near Utah. The time from about 10 or 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next morning is completely void in my mind. It's like I just jumped time or something. The next time I slept was when I crossed into Southern California at a rest stop off the 15. At this time, as I entered into California, I didn't realize the time glitch occurred. It wasn't until about 2 days after I arrived back in the Los Angeles area, after I rested and recollected my trip, that I realized about night 3 and the missing time. The other weird thing is I rarely pulled all-nighters anymore, so even if I did on night 3, I would clearly know that, and known at the time, especially driving across the country. Like, whoa, I've been up for 24 hours and haven't slept, which I definitely did not do. Plus, I would not even make this trip without sleeping, nor would I want to. It's just a super strange time loss, and I'm wondering if the weird towers and lights off the interstates have something to do with it. I didn't live with my parents for a few years as a kid, and when I moved back in with them, they were living in this beautiful stone house, tucked into a little pocket of trees, hidden from the main roads and isolated from traffic noise. We called it the Rock House, and it was the first place my parents really wanted to settle down at, and they would talk a lot about how much they loved it and wanted to grow old there. Before I even moved in, though, the garage had collapsed and kept slowly collapsing over time. But it was an old house. We didn't really need the garage, and we didn't have much money at the time, so they weren't too pressed about it, and we were just planning to rebuild it later. Now, there was one immediate thing about this house. It had a huge cellar with a trap door on the back porch that you couldn't pay me millions to go into. It was an empty, dirty, high-ceilinged concrete space with nothing special about it, but nobody in my family ever went down there. It freaked all of us out a little, and when they showed it to me the first time, my family told me the house was haunted. I believe in ghosts and all, but I wasn't super concerned. I think lots of houses are probably a little bit haunted, and the things that they described all sounded pretty tame, except for the things that happened to my sister. And while I did believe her, I also knew that my sister always had this thing where ghosts liked her, or at least liked to tease her. She had tons of experiences, like her hair or clothes being tugged when nobody was there, or having animals behave as if someone was behind her. Minor things, but they seemed semi-constant. In this case, though, she said that she'd seen a ghost in the Rock House, and that he was an old man, who she only saw once, but often felt the presence. He apparently liked to sit in her room and watch her while she slept, which, yeah, that's uncomfortable, but she just kept reiterating that he never tried to scare her, so she was okay with him. She's very pretty, so I definitely felt a little bit like he was being a pervert, but he didn't sound malicious, so it was just creepy. Probably the first time I had anything specific happen was when I had my best friend over. I told him everything about the place, so we were kind of goofing about it and screwing around with one of those free EMF reader apps. He's the skeptical type, and I assumed all those apps just used some form of algorithm or guesswork, so it was all in jest, and we didn't expect any accuracy. He just wanted to mosey around and make jokes about my haunted house. But as soon as we started walking with the app on, specific things in the house would spike the reading to maximum, and then it would go right back down as soon as we pulled it away. This happened with a couple of furniture items, but particularly the bathroom sink. Note that the sink will come back up again. We were still just playing around, trying to figure out if it was a certain metal or something like that triggering the app. We went outside to see what the reading was for the trap door on the porch. Maximum, of course. And that did freak me out, both because the cellar already made me feel uneasy, and because, other than the hinges, the trap door was just wooden. My friend was having a blast, though, and after confirming that the area directly above the trap door reliably made it spike, he wanted to go put the phone by my sister. She was a little irritated but put up with it, and while she herself didn't get any spike, if we moved the phone a foot or so away from her, we got something. So we held it still, and for the first time, instead of suddenly spiking, the dial started going up and down slowly. My sister was unfazed because she'd been dealing with stuff like this all her life. But she told us to quit after a second because the feeling she had, like someone was pacing around her chair in tight circles, was getting uncomfortable. I'll repeat that using the app had been a joke, but my friend also admitted that the places it registered were really specific and weird. I'm not exactly afraid of ghosts, but I don't want to bother them, and I don't want them to bother me. I was afraid I had been too flippant on the subject, and felt I had been rather pointedly told this. There were also weird incidents with my family member who stayed with us, claiming that she saw other members of the house doing really disturbing things they shouldn't do. For example, saying that she saw my younger brother standing on the couch, looking into her curtained-off room while she got dressed, that she shouted, saw him jump down and heard the thump when he hit the floor, but he wasn't there anymore when she opened up the curtain. She really thought that he had done this, even though he was only 12, and was also vocally interested in boys. Even worse, she'd once said that she'd seen my dad going into my sister's room late one night, so she got suspicious and watched the door for a long time, but never saw him come out. It was lucky that the timing was the way it was, because that night my mom and dad actually stayed up all night talking, and my mom knew for certain that he had only gotten up once to use the bathroom and then came right back. Both times, when pressed, she said it was technically too dark to be totally sure who she saw, but she said it had to be my brother looking over the curtain, because I was too tall to stand on the back of the couch like that without stooping. And it had to be my dad she saw in the hallway, because nobody else in the house is as big as he is. She wasn't a great person and ended up being kicked out, so we all assumed that she was lying. As it turned out, she was about many things, but looking back on it, she might have been genuinely mistaken. They were definitely weird and risky lies to tell, considering she was trying to stay on our mom's good side, and my little brother is absolutely my mom's baby. She could never believe he did that, especially after he told her earnestly he didn't have any clue what she was talking about. And that's not even to mention definitively that my dad hadn't done anything weird that night. Just feels like if someone was going to lie, they'd at least try to do it well, so I'm not sure. Things just went on until one day my sister and I were at home and our cousin was over as well. My parents were out smoking on the porch and I was on the phone with another friend, just talking about something while I paced around the kitchen and the girls were hanging out in the kitchen. I wander weird places sometimes, so I don't know why, but I ambled down the hallway and pushed open the bathroom door and took a step into the room. Before I could turn back around, as there was no reason for me to be in there, I heard the loudest crashing pop sound ring through the bathroom. At first, I thought I had just slammed the door against the wall really hard. I'm autistic, and sudden noises always kind of put me on my ass. So I stood there surprised, and it took me a second to process that the sound was way too loud to be from me, and that I had seen a motion to my left, away from the door. I eventually looked around me, and then just hightailed it straight out of the bathroom. My cousin and sister ran into me on my way out, worried that I'd hurt myself somehow, and I just kind of gestured back at the bathroom and the sink, and they freaked out. The sink we had was one of those cheapish white ones with the tall pillar base, and the basin hooked onto the wall above it. It's hard to describe, but the basin was pulled out of the wall and on the floor, and the base part was in shards under it, like something really heavy had been dropped into the sink right as I stepped inside, and the basin just crushed all the way through the pillar. The pipes weren't damaged, but the whole pillar was in pieces. And the holes that had been holding the basin were fully stripped out of the wall. Of course, they were both like, "What did you do?" And I swore and had my friend confirm I'd been on video chat, and he'd seen me step through the door, heard the crash, then saw the pause and me gunning it. Nothing else. No chance for me to have interacted with anything that could have caused that. And the sink basin shouldn't have been heavy enough to break the pillar like that, no matter what I could have done to it, short of sitting in it. So we were all just standing there freaking out when my parents came in, having heard the noise even from outside. At that point, I was both scared as hell from what happened and afraid that my parents would somehow think I'd done it. The thing that really got me, though, was that we explained what happened and my mom was just confused. But my dad just kind of sighed and went, "Yep, it's okay. I know it wasn't you." And we had to get the sink fixed, and that was the end of it. He reacted as if someone had told him before he got there. Nobody really wanted to talk about it afterwards, I think because it was the first time we felt like something was actually trying to scare us. I have no idea why that happened, but nothing like it ever happened again, and I very strongly hope it stays that way. But really, unfortunately, the garage was a warning sign, and the house kept collapsing. This was unrelated to the sink, by the way. There's no way structural degradation could have caused that. We had professionals come look at the place, and they confirmed that the foundation wasn't solid, and that we had to move out, because there wasn't any way to fix it, and staying there was dangerous. Apparently, eventually the walls would give out, the ceilings would fall in and break through the floor, and all the debris would fall into the cellar. I haven't seen it in 4 years now, but when I visit my hometown, I'm absolutely making my boyfriend visit the place with me, if only to see what state of disrepair it's in. It still makes me kind of sad, because we really did love that house. My family has always had these strange encounters with skinwalkers for as long as I can remember, but this one is the most chilling. A little context beforehand. This story involves my mother's cousin, who lived not far from us. This story is told from different family members: herself, her son, and my aunt. My mother's cousin had always been an outgoing person, always meeting people. She was practically the life of any party. She had been in a very long relationship with her 2 kids' father for years, and when that ended, she became a single mother for years. Meeting someone new was not her top priority, but after being single for a while, she had met someone. She had fallen head over heels in love with him, and so did her kids. He was not a bad guy, and he did truly care for her and her kids. But after being together for a year, they both began being plagued by a skinwalker. Things started out small, like small taps on the windows, to hearing whispers outside their bedroom window. But with each visit, things got worse. One of the first encounters that happened, they had been asleep when her boyfriend had awoken in the middle of the night and needed to use the restroom. On the reservation, indoor plumbing and running water was still non-existent, so he had to do his business outside in the outhouse. He explained that he was then hit with a strong smell of decay and death. Wondering what that smell was and not really wanting to find out, he quickly finished and made a quick dash back to the house. As he neared the back door, he made one last look towards the outhouse. He said that he really wished he hadn't done this. Next to the outhouse stood a black figure. It was gaunt and rail-thin. As he stared at it, he said it hunched over and stood on all fours like a dog. Thinking it was his eyes playing tricks on him, he blew it off and went back to bed. The following day, everything appeared to be normal again. and he never mentioned the encounter to his girlfriend. Weeks went by, and gradually, the skinwalker visits became more intense. The next encounter was more frightening. My mother's cousin had explained that they were all outside the house enjoying the night. They had been smoking cigarettes and talking. It was getting late, and she decided that she was going to bed. Her boyfriend told her he would be in shortly after, that he wanted to have one more cigarette before bed. As she was getting ready for bed, her boyfriend had come running through the door, pale and visibly shaken. Startled by his appearance, she asked him what was wrong. After he had calmed down, he told her that as he was finishing the last of his cigarette, he heard a scratch on the roof of the house. Thinking it was one of the cats that had gotten stuck up there, he walked a few steps backwards to see if he could see the cat on the roof. Only instead, he saw a black figure sitting on top of the roof, its face painted black and white, and some kind of animal skin on top of its head. Frightened, he ran back inside. Normally, with an encounter, traditional beliefs say that it's best to contact a shaman and have a ceremony done. But because her boyfriend was an outsider, he never believed in our traditional beliefs and refused to take part in any of it. Again, things went on. Whenever she visited family, she appeared in distress and didn't know how to handle the situation. Things again increased in severity. This encounter happened maybe 1 or 2 months after the initial encounter, and was told to us by her eldest son. He said that his mother was out running a quick errand for a family friend, while him, his younger brother, and his mother's boyfriend stayed home. He said that they had just finished watching a movie. Her boyfriend had gone back to their room, while he and his brother went back to their room to play some video games. Maybe 15 minutes had passed when he heard his mother's boyfriend scream. Startled, he quickly got up and ran to their room, her boyfriend quickly running past him and running out the door. Stepping outside, he called out for him for a few minutes, and he finally came slowly walking around the corner of the house. His face looked shocked with fear. He walked quietly past him and back into the house. Sitting down on the couch across from him, he asked him what the hell happened. Taking a few deep breaths, he answered. He had been sitting on the bed, about to get ready for bed, when he heard whispers and taps on the window behind him. Thinking it was his stepson or the youngest brother playing a joke on him, he quickly got up and pulled the shade apart, coming face to face with a skinwalker. He locked eyes with it and described it again with its face being painted, wearing an animal pelt on top of its head, and its eyes glowed an unnatural color. Frightened, he asked him where he and his younger brother were at, and they said in his room playing video games. Growing concerned, her son finally asked his mother to please speak to his grandma about the encounter. Not really sure what to do, she finally relented and went against her boyfriend's wishes and sought spiritual help from a shaman. Afterwards, things seemed to get better and the encounter stopped, and everything seemed to get back on track for them. But skip ahead several months later. That's when the most terrifying incident happened. This part of the story was told to us by my aunt after she made a visit to her. After my mother's cousin had visited the shaman, things seemed to get better, and they had not experienced anything from the skinwalker for some time. But one night, things went from bad to worse. They had been up for a while, talking and laughing, feeling things had gotten better. She had decided it was time for bed, but her boyfriend wanted to finish up the last of his cigarette. Unbeknownst to her, something was happening outside as she lay in her bed. Her boyfriend had finally come back inside and had gotten in bed. They had both been asleep for a few hours. She was then awoken with her boyfriend on top of her, strangling her. Terrified, she screamed, Her 2 kids had come in, only to see him still choking and punching her. Quickly, her 2 boys pushed him off her. She grabbed her kids and ran to the door. Turning back, they said that they saw him kneeling on the floor in a daze and wondering what was going on. Once he realized what happened, he quickly got up and ran out of the house. Still in shock, they ran 100 yards to her parents' house and quickly called the police. Within an hour, they had arrived and began searching for the boyfriend to make sure he hadn't disappeared or hurt himself. They finally found him, but I don't remember where. It had been a few weeks when we learned what happened to her from my aunt. We learned that he had been sent to jail for the assault and served some serious jail time. We also learned that she had been helped through a spiritual healer, and according to him, on the night of the attack, when he wanted to finish his smoke, he had been confronted by a skinwalker. He said that the skinwalker wanted him to harm her and then harm himself, but during the attack something had happened and he was unable to do it. This story still sends chills down my spine as to what could have happened. Luckily, she survived, and as of today, she's happily married and has expanded her family. I believe I saw what a lot of people call a not deer last fall. I figured this as good as a place as any to post, since I see the term not deer tied in with skinwalkers and other similar creatures pretty often. There isn't a lot to this story, but it stuck with me, and every time I think about it, I feel really uneasy. I live in Colorado, in a mountain town south of Denver. I live off a winding back road through a valley. One side of the road is right against a rock, steep like a wall in some places and more sloping in others, and the other side kind of drops off into the valley. Also might be worth noting that the mountain on the other side of the valley is a huge burn site with nothing but skeleton trees. I've heard a couple of stories that have taken place near burn sites, so maybe there's some correlation. This was probably around late August, early September. I was driving home late, probably around 1 a.m. I know the road and all of the curves pretty well, so I was going at pretty decent speed. I wasn't being as actively aware of my surroundings as I should have been, especially since deer and elk are pretty common here. Anyway, I was coming up on the last curve before my street, and I saw a deer standing at the side of the road on the side with the rock face. This deer was standing completely still, facing the rock wall. That in itself doesn't sound too strange, I know, but there was just something unnatural in its stillness, and the fact that it was staring straight into the rock, nowhere it could go, was odd. But what has stuck with me is the feeling I immediately got upon seeing it. Just an ungodly pit in my stomach. It felt like my heart stopped. And this wasn't the, oh crap, the deer on the side of the road surprised me kind of stomach pit. This was an absolute feeling of dread. It also seemed like there was just something off about the deer. For the life of me, I can't picture it in my head or pinpoint what it was, but something proportion-wise was wrong. Like maybe its legs were a little too long, or its torso was stretched out, I'm not sure. I didn't have time to react, I just kept driving. As I rounded the curve, I literally could not take my eyes off the rearview mirror. And the thing didn't move at all. Not a flinch, nothing, just stone still. Even after it was behind the curve and I couldn't see it anymore, I still couldn't peel my eyes off the rear view. I pulled into the garage and hit the garage door before I had even parked, and when I got out of the car, I couldn't stop myself from running up the stairs. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread, like I was in danger. I'm not by any means superstitious. I like stories about cryptids and I think they're super interesting, but I've never really believed them. But since that night, as short-lived as that encounter was, If there was one supernatural thing I believe in, it was that creature. I know in my gut it wasn't just a deer. It's also worth noting that after I told my visiting friend about the experience, she admitted that that year, when she was visiting for the first time, she had felt a similar dread and pit in the stomach as we had approached that same spot. My aunt worked for a public service company in our small town in New Mexico that helped people that were in the streets who were homeless or in need of a place to stay. Most times they would get calls from the local police or nearby hospitals if someone was either intoxicated or just needed a warm bed. Her position at the company was a driver. When they received a call, she was tasked with picking them up. On this night, things took a terrifying turn. Local police had gotten several calls from a nearby neighborhood of someone walking around the area, and were afraid he may break into somebody's house. Dispatch had sent out a unit to see what was going on. Once they were there, they had found a male wandering the nearby foothills. At this point, the company was called and were asked to send one of their crew to pick up the person. A company van was sent that had just picked up a couple of people and was already en route. When they got to the neighborhood, the van pulled up to the police. The driver, who was a close friend to my aunt, said the two officers were frightened and looked like they had seen a ghost. One of the officers brought the individual out of the squad car. One terrified look from the driver, and he knew what they were picking up. It was a skinwalker. Horrified and not wanting to touch this thing, he led him to the back of the van. Confused, his partner asked him what was wrong. His only response was, "Let's get back fast. I don't want to be around this thing for too long." His partner opened up the back of the van, and much to the shock of the other passengers, the skinwalker got in and quickly squeezed into one side of the van. Once back at the main facility, the two men led the people inside. My aunt saw what was walking in and she was terrified. She asked her friend if she could handle the check-in by herself, while she excused herself to another part of the building. When everyone was checked in, my aunt told them to turn in whatever valuables they had. As everyone had finished taking everything out of their pockets, the only one who hadn't was the skinwalker. There were only 2 people brave enough to go through its pockets, and what they find scares them even more. As they start pulling items out of its pockets, they were shocked at what they found. They begin pulling out strands of hair, fingernails, pieces of small bones, and cigarette butts. It also wore a small pouch around its neck. By this point, the staff were so scared that they refused to look inside. They all decide to let it leave. She explained as it walked out, they quickly locked the doors and stayed inside until the morning. The following day, as they let out many of the people who stayed the night, many of them told the staff that they heard knocks on the windows and eerie whispers through the night, many refusing to look out the window. I'm going to be honest. Before this happened, I honestly thought Glitch in the Matrix believers were a bit off. I changed my mind. This happened just a few weeks ago. I was drinking my morning coffee like I do every morning. when I looked up and saw something that freaked me out so bad. I told my husband and kids, and I've seen UFOs and ghosts. Anyway, I look up, and a chunk of one of my walls that's part of the alcove leading to my bedroom is a freaking computer screen. We're talking like Star Trek meets Independence Day. I silently lost my stuff. I looked down briefly to grab my phone to take a photo of it, but then it was gone and back to a normal wall. I was singing in the shower the other day, and I stopped for a split moment to bend down to get some shampoo. As I went to do this, I heard myself singing. My mouth never opened. I don't have schizophrenia or anything that would make a noise like that. It was the same song, my voice, but I wasn't singing. And when I went to open my mouth to ask if someone was there, the singing stopped. I also wasn't listening to any music, so it couldn't have been any other voices. I sing a cappella in the shower. I asked my roommates if they were playing music or singing in their shower on the opposite side of the wall, and they said they were all in the living room playing a board game. The voice was clear, as if it were coming from my own mouth. The shower that I shower in has pretty harsh water pressure, so it's crazy loud. I can't think of how this could have happened, and it's been plaguing my mind a lot. I don't drink often, and I wasn't under the influence when this happened. I've never done drugs. I'm terrified and unsure as to what happened. I have no logical explanation for it. I am floored. Nothing like this has ever happened before. This was around 2 years ago. I still remember it so clearly. It was around 2 a.m. and I was coming inside from having a cigarette. As I was coming inside, I saw my sister walk into the kitchen. It wasn't uncommon for her to be awake late, as we both have trouble sleeping sometimes. I see her walk around the corner into the kitchen. I quietly called out for her, but she kept walking and didn't acknowledge me. I assumed she just didn't hear me. So I followed her to see what she was up to, and I saw her walk into the pantry, around another corner. As I stepped inside, I had the most disgusting sensation go through my body, realizing she wasn't there. Nowhere to be found, even though I know exactly what I saw, or so I thought. I quickly walked to her room to see if, well, maybe I was crazy. I opened her door, and to my absolute surprise, she was sound asleep, snoring. There's just no way that she could have got past me into her room without me seeing it. It just couldn't have happened. My friends and I would regularly play Dungeons and Dragons in person until quarantine hit. Since we couldn't see each other, we eventually settled on doing some sessions from home over the internet. I keep my dice in a tiny drawstring bag, like most people do, and keep that bag in my backpack. One time, as I was preparing for an online session, I poured my dice out of the tiny drawstring bag onto my bed. I counted 6 dice instead of the 7 that there should have been. My first thought was one was still in the drawstring bag, so I grabbed the bag and completely compressed it with my palm. The entire thing was clenched in my fist, and I didn't feel any dice in there. I subsequently looked on and under my bed, in my backpack, and any other place I could think of. It was frustrating, as I thought I lost the dice out of my set, until I grabbed the drawstring bag again, and it was just in there. The last dice was just in the bag I already fully checked. I cannot stress enough that I compressed and flattened the entire drawstring bag in my hand, and didn't feel anything. It really baffled me, and none of my friends believed me. This just happened this morning. I was getting ready for work and my wife was waking up with the baby. The weather had called for an ice storm turning to rain. Now the last storm or snow that happened meant my son was to stay at home and do virtual class. My wife also works from home, so this is tough for both her and him. Anyway, I'm coming up from the basement stairs getting my son's lunch ready, and my watch vibrates and I got a text from my wife. I look at it and it says, "It looks wet out there. Can you get more info from the school if they are closing or not?" I read it and let the dogs out and then fed them. I thought this was a normal question, so I replied, "What info?" If the school hadn't contacted us, then any info I was going to get wouldn't say they were closed. She later came down and asked what I was talking about. I told her I was replying to her text, and she had no clue. I searched all my texts and looked up the wording that she had used, but nothing. She's laughing, but damn. I even replied to her question with no evidence of her text. Not on my watch, not on my phone, not in her mind. Weird. Something is glitchy here. Weird things happen to me when I'm sick sometimes. I had the flu and my wife and I were in bed watching YouTube when I realized we had already seen the video she had on, and she had no clue what I was talking about. I told her the entire video. It was a video about a man making different dishes with the same apples, and even told her what she and I had been saying about it. At first, I thought she must have forgotten about us watching it, until she put on another video, and I got the craziest deja vu and realized we had already seen that one, too. They weren't in my YouTube history, and that's when I started getting weirded out, because I swore we had already seen them. I scrolled down to the recommended videos, and they were the exact same videos from my memories. But that's when I realized that I couldn't place exactly when this happened. I just knew it had. It felt like I was in a simulation or something and was replaying a scene, but it was going differently this time because I was changing my reactions. Normally I would just chalk it up to being sick and feeling weird, except that I knew what several videos were and remembered our entire conversations about them and everything. It started to feel like a creepy prank, but like I said, my history showed that we never actually watched the videos before then. It's not anything too crazy, but for some reason it really freaked me out, because it felt so strongly like I was acting out a scene that had already happened, and it felt eerie, like I wasn't supposed to be aware of it. I wish I could better convey the unsettling energy of the experience, but sometimes these things are hard to express. I've had other strange experiences when sick, but nothing like this. I knew what they were going to say on all of the videos before it even happened. And this sounds insane, but it felt like I was hearing the future or something. I'm not schizophrenic or anything like that, and don't experience things like this often at all. I just don't have an explanation for what happened. It made me a lot more suspicious of the probability of the simulation theory, though. This happened a few days ago. I'm an only child and I live at home with my parents. My mom is currently in a different state for work and has been there for 10 weeks. On Friday at around 5 a.m., my dad left to go to his friend's house in New Hampshire to golf, and he got back Sunday afternoon. My dad and I share chores around the house while my mom is gone, and I'm extremely weird with touching wet food or just old food in general. So my dad always rinses the dishes and then runs the dishwasher, and all I have to do is put them away. Our dishwasher automatically opens when it's finished cleaning, and that's how I know when they're ready to be put away. He left for New Hampshire Friday morning before I woke up. I was upstairs doing homework and watching Netflix basically all morning until I went down to eat lunch before work. I made myself one of those microwave mac and cheese cup things and went into the silverware drawer to get a fork and noticed there was barely any in there. We have big forks and little forks, and I prefer the big ones, but there was only little ones in there. I looked in the dishwasher, which was closed, meaning it was empty. But I checked just in case it was closed by accident. There was nothing in there. I remember being super confused because the sink was empty and so was the dishwasher, so I had no clue where all of the dishes and silverware were. I decided to just ask my dad later when he called in to check on me, as he always does when he's away, and just grabbed one of the forks from the drawer and ate my mac and cheese. After I got home from work, I made myself some pasta for dinner. Don't flame me for only eating pasta all day. I'm lazy, okay? When I finished, I walked over to the drawer and I got annoyed when I remembered there were only little forks in there. I turned around to grab my phone to call my dad and ask him where everything was, since he hadn't called yet. And when I did, the dishwasher caught my eye. It was open. I looked inside, and it was full of clean dishes. There were all of my big forks, all of the dishes I had used recently, everything. I was terrified. I don't know why it scared me so bad, but it did. I grabbed my pasta, my phone, and a fork as fast as I could out of the dishwasher and bolted up the stairs to my room. I immediately called my dad and told him what happened, and asked him when he did the dishes last. He said he did them the morning before he left for New Hampshire. I asked if he had come home at all. He said no. I am literally 100% positive that the dishwasher was empty when I made the mac and cheese earlier that day. I wasn't half asleep. I wasn't under the influence. I wasn't imagining it. Nothing. As I said before, I am an only child. My mom is on the other side of the country, and my dad was 3 hours away by the time I even woke up that day. No one has keys to my house but us. Then I was trying to think of everything I could to explain it. I was wondering if someone broke in. I was like, did someone break in, do my dishes, take nothing, then leave? Do I have a second dishwasher I never noticed till now and I got them mixed up? Did I fall asleep and sleepwalk and do my dishes? The part that scares me the most is the fact that the dishes weren't in the sink either the first time. They were just nowhere. Where were they? I know this is a super long and detailed story about some forks, but I'm still terrified. I don't know what to think about this. This happened to me this morning when I got into work, and I have no idea whatsoever how it happened. I arrived at work this morning at 7:45, and I sat in my car for nearly 10 minutes before gathering my lunch and exiting my car to head into work and clock in. My fellow office mates, 8 of us total, tend to arrive after me 2 or 3 minutes before we begin our day at 8 a.m. Today was different. When I exited my car and headed for the office, none of my office mates had arrived yet. My coworkers, who work in shipping and receiving, meanwhile, have been at work since 7:30 a.m. I walked through the lobby, punched in my security code to access the warehouse, and headed for our break area to clock into the biometric palm scanner. The device gave me an affirmative message and displayed the time I clocked in, 7:56 a.m. Great. I opened the refrigerator door and placed my lunch toward the back of the top shelf before heading to the one and only stairwell to my office. This is where the glitch happened. I walked up the flight of steps, and to my shock, all of my coworkers were already at their workstations. I asked, completely startled, "When did you all get here?" They looked at me confused. Claire, our marketing manager, said, "We've been here for an hour. We're about to head to the boss's office for the production meeting. Where have you been?" Still shocked, I said, "Where have I been? It's only about 3 minutes before 8, as I gestured toward my workstation. The time on my lock screen said 8:58 a.m. Somehow, I lost an hour of my time walking up the stairwell to go to my office. Chances are you've seen this blimp, or at least a photo of it at some point in your life. But you are probably unaware that this very aircraft involves one of the most bizarre mysteries. During the Second World War, the U.S. Navy deployed L-class blimps provided by the Goodyear Company along the West Coast. They were to carry and deliver supplies and aid in surveillance measures. While patrolling, these blimps were mainly looking for Japanese submarines that may be posing a threat. On August 16, 1942, one of these very patrols was to take place. The L-8 blimp and designated Flight 101 was to take off from Treasure Island and recon the San Francisco Bay Area. The pilots aboard the flight were 27-year-old Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody and 34-year-old Ensign Charles Alice Adams. It was Adams' first flight in this sort of blimp, but both men were trained and experienced pilots. Machinist Riley Hill was to partake in the flight, but was ordered off last minute, with most speculating that the blimp was already too heavy and couldn't carry all 3 men. After Hill made note that the aircraft was in perfect working order and had plenty of fuel, the 2 men departed. Flight 101 left at 6 a.m. and arrived a few miles east of the Farallone Islands an hour and a half later. At 7:42, they radioed into Treasure Island where they were located, mentioned that they spotted an oil slick, which can be caused by submarines, that they were going to investigate and to stand by.
"We're seeing something in the water. Going to take a look. Stand by."
This would be the last time anyone heard from the 2 men. At the time, a Liberty ship and a boat of fishermen were out in the surrounding area and witnessed the next events. They claimed that the blimp circled the area where the oil slick had been reported, dropped 2 flares into the water as if to mark the location, and descended close to the water surface. Then, around 9 a.m., over an hour after their last radio call, the blimp quickly ascended and began its way towards San Francisco, instead of continuing its intended route. Treasure Island tried multiple times to get a hold of the crew, but to no avail. They alerted nearby aircrafts, and around 10:20 a.m., a Pan Am flight spotted the blimp near the Golden Gate Bridge. They reported that nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and Flight 101 seemed to be headed back to base. 10 minutes later, it was said that the blimp rose rapidly into the clouds, reaching altitudes that could be dangerous for such an aircraft, and were also against protocol. At 10:50 a.m., the blimp was then seen by beachgoers to have been deflating and hitting the sand. Multiple witnesses, from the fishermen to the people on the beach, claimed to have seen the men inside the gondola. Flight 101 bounced along the sand, rose, and hit the side of a hill, and then finally crashed in the middle of a Daly City street. Hundreds of citizens and numerous officials were watching this unfold, and were on the scene immediately. To their surprise, the two crewmen were nowhere to be found. The state of the blimp upon crashing was peculiarly normal. There were multiple parachutes, an operational machine gun, and strangely enough, the radio was in complete working order. One of the pilot's hats was also still placed on top of the blimp's control panel, and a briefcase with important information remained locked and secured. 2 life vests were missing, but it was mandatory to wear them while flying over water. The craft had hours of fuel left, and the lifeboat was still aboard and in place. One of the 2 underwater bombs remained on the blimp, and the other was later found to be knocked off while hitting the hill. Though there are a few odd observations. There was a leak in the blimp's helium, which could have happened because of the high altitude, that the gondola door was latched open on the outside, and the safety bar in the door had been removed. The engines were also idling, which leads to speculation that they were trying to slow down the blimp. Last, a microphone connected to speakers outside of the blimp was found dangling in the gondola, meaning perhaps one of the men was speaking to a nearby ship, or to his colleague who was outside of the craft. An extensive search was conducted by air, land, and water, but the men were never seen again. After the war, the blimp was returned to the Goodyear Company, where they repaired and refurbished it, and used it for promotional purposes until 1982. There are many theories as to what happened to Cody and Adams. One of the most logical explanations is that there was a malfunction that needed to be fixed on the outside of the craft. One man climbed out of the gondola to fix it, then fell, and when the other man tried to help, he also fell. As convincing as it may seem, it also discredits the multiple eyewitness reports of seeing the men in the gondola throughout the flight. The fishermen claimed to have been close enough to see the crew members' hair color, and they watched as they left the scene and headed back to shore. Not to mention, the men were most likely wearing their life vests, and a search was conducted not long after they were reported missing. Some people gravitate toward the notion that there was a Japanese submarine, and, somehow, they were able to apprehend the 2 men. This again lacks viable evidence, as the 2 ships at sea watched when the men left the area they had previously marked with flares. They clearly would have seen such an event take place, especially if an underwater vessel was trying to capture crewmen that were in the air. Another theory is that the men went AWOL and escaped while bumping into the hill. But if they had been planning an escape for some reason, one would think they would have equipped their parachutes for protection. They also had no reasoning to do such a thing. More outlandish theories involve 1 or 2 of the men being spies, an alien abduction, and a love triangle quarrel that resulted in a crime. The Navy's investigation concluded that there was no state of emergency. There was no fire on the blimp, no poor weather that day, and no possibility of a stowaway on board the flight. The pilots still had the capability to radio for help if they were in danger or needed assistance, but no further messages were ever received. What made these men vanish from this L-8 blimp? Was it a simple mistake that unfortunately led to both men perishing without a trace? Or was it something more sinister? The following story happened yesterday while I was sleeping over at a friend's place where we'd share one bed. I suddenly awoke in the middle of the night, and there was a face with huge black eyes right in front of mine. It definitely didn't look human, and it didn't show any expression. It also seemed to look at me, but at the same time, past me. It's kind of hard to describe. Because it was extremely dark, I tried to rationalize that what I was seeing must have been my friend's cat. I thought the huge eyes were simply the cat's face being too close to mine. Because I wanted to move away from the face, I started to stroke it, just like I would do a cat, and said, "Fiora," which is the name of my friend's cat. I could feel my hand touching it, but instead of fur, it felt like I was touching a person's skin. That's when I started to realize that something wasn't right. My friend, who tends to wake up from the slightest bit of noise, and who thankfully happened to be awake at the same moment, replied, "Fiora isn't here." The thing's face moved away from mine, and I realized that the eyes remained big. I sat up abruptly and became scared as I noticed it wasn't my friend's cat. I then saw it move behind my friend's head and on top of her pillow. I told her to look at her pillow, still hoping that my mind is playing tricks on me and that it was just the cat. My friend sat up, stared at her pillow. I can still see that thing sitting there, but she didn't see anything. I started to panic and asked her to quickly switch on the light, but that's when the thing disappeared. I insisted that we looked around the room. The doors and windows were closed, so nothing could have entered or left the room, but I firmly wanted to hold on to the belief that it must have been the cat. We obviously found nothing, and my friend began to worry as I was panicking at that point. I tried to process what happened and was so confused by the fact that I was stroking something moments ago. Sleep paralysis usually means being unable to move and feeling the sensation of being touched or having some weight on top of you. But this time, it was the opposite. I could move around freely, didn't feel any pressure on top of me, but I could touch the thing, and it felt like it was physically there. The face was a bit smaller than that of an average human adult head. The eyes were about 6 centimeters in height and a bit longer in width. I described them as black, but they also had a thin dark gray iris and large pupils. The eyes were slightly popping out of the head. It had a very small mouth, no hair on its head, and no ears. The skin was a muddy grayish color and also covered with a few brown stripes. Once it moved to my friend's pillow, I saw that it didn't have a neck, but a thin body that was only about 1 meter long. The body itself had a pitch black color, and it walked on 4 legs. My family would often move due to my dad's job. We lived in around 9 different states, sometimes moving houses within them. When I was 6, we had moved to Wisconsin in an older Victorian home. In the first year, I had fallen asleep with my mom in the living room. I had woken up at about 1 a.m., and I had seen that about 20 feet away on the bottom of the stairs was a woman. She stood about 6 feet tall and had long black hair and wore a black and white striped dress that covered her feet. Her face was not visible. I panicked but couldn't move. It took about 5 minutes of me squeezing my eyes shut to fall back asleep. I would wake up with small bruises on my arms and legs, but thought nothing of it. This same thing happened nearly 2 years later, before we moved. However, I was asleep in my bedroom, and I saw her in the hallway, still not moving. I woke up that time with bits of my hair cut around my head. I remember thinking it was my sister until she denied doing so, causing huge upset with the family about her abusing me, which wasn't true at all. Now, we had moved to Kansas in a rather nice Tudor-style home. My parents liked older homes. If it was older than 80, we had to live there. I was nearly 11 when I, once again, fell asleep on the couch with my mom. The house was smaller, so the living room was a bit cozier, with a fireplace and stairs on one side, with the den on the other, maybe 10 feet. I opened my eyes, and again, she was at the bottom of the stairs, slightly illuminated by the streetlight outside. The next morning, I woke with a migraine, the one and only one I've ever had. It was only me, 2 of my sisters, and my parents at the time. Then, 5 years later, we moved to Florida in a rather new home, which was odd for my parents. Just one sister with us this time. Within the first month, she appeared again. I still couldn't move or speak. All I could do was stare. She was in the doorway, maybe 6 feet away, just watching me, wearing that same dress. The next morning, I had cuts on my breasts and neck. After we moved house, about 4 miles away, was one of the last times I ever saw her, until a few weeks ago. She was at the foot of my bed, her face still covered, but I could almost see her breathing. I woke up untouched, but came down with a nasty stomach bug later that day. The last time I saw her, my parents and I moved back into my childhood home in Michigan. It was my grandparents before they left. I had a room in the basement and was rather happy with the setup. It wasn't until exactly 1 year after I moved in that I experienced her. This time I refused to open my eyes, tired of being afraid. But I could hear her. She was right next to me, breathing in my ear. She didn't say anything at all, just breathed. The next morning, I was unable to eat due to a nasty sore throat. See, I would assume that this was just some sleep paralysis demon or an overactive imagination. However, I still can't shake the feeling that something was, or is, here. I still get random bruises on my leg. I take iron supplements, otherwise I'm very healthy. And I randomly feel nauseous when I'm alone or before bed. It's something I've gotten used to, but I always get a creepy feeling on my neck when I'm alone. I still panic when my parents leave, and I fill my work and school schedule as much as possible to avoid this. I don't see anything wrong with my surroundings. It only affects me. I've had random spouts of sleep paralysis throughout my young life, mainly after a weekend of partying and not sleeping. However, the last few weeks I've been experiencing quite a few weird headaches. like migraines that go into the back of my skull. One night, I was having one of those nights where your body just keeps pulling you into paralysis. Eventually, I stopped fighting and let myself fall into it. I knew something had got into my bed because I could feel breathing under my sheets. Whatever it was climbed onto my back and whispered into my ear.
"Hello, Aaron."
Obviously, I felt terrified, but I wanted to know what kind of beast had entered my bed, so I opened my eyes. Its fingers were pressed over mine, kind of as if it were pushing me into the bed. They were long and scaly, and I know it must have been a kind of reptilian beast. It whispered again that I am very sick, and I might need to go to the hospital. At that point, I probably thought the beast was messing with me, so I just wiggled and wiggled my toes until I finally woke up. I really felt like it wanted me to know that though, and it was fighting extra hard to push me into the bed, as if to say, "Don't ignore me." I fell asleep, and in the morning I woke up with a strange feeling in my neck again. I ended up having a stroke and a blood clot in my neck. I'm only 24, so it was completely out of the blue, with no previous health problems. I've been in a hospital for about a week and recovering well. I thought it was pretty interesting that whatever came to me in my paralysis wanted to warn me about what would happen. For context, the first time I ever had sleep paralysis, I didn't know what it was, so I thought I was being possessed by demons. They were episodes where I would wake up lying on my back and felt like my entire back was being sucked into my bed. Like when you drop a rock into a very still lake. Visualize that and turn it into a feeling. And then I would hear the sound of the only thing I can describe as a very old heavy drawbridge coming down, like creaky old wood and chains, if that makes sense. And then, at the same time, I felt as if my body was sinking into my bed at a 45-degree angle. I absolutely thought I was being summoned to hell. Every time I had sleep paralysis, I would fight with myself to try to wake myself up. If I couldn't move my body at all, I would try to manipulate my breathing to try to engage any muscle at all to wake up. I would also never open my eyes, in fear that I'd see a demon in the corner of my room. I was not about to scare myself more than I needed to. After those happened, each time I got sleep paralysis, I started chanting in my head something about angels or God, in hopes that it would stop. Then after a while, my brain developed a new sleep paralysis episode, and somehow did all that scary stuff, but added the sound of a chorus of angels harmonizing, the sound like welcoming you into heaven. But even so, I still felt extremely scared in the moment because of the sensation that my body was being sucked into the earth. I was staying at my grandparents' a few years ago. It was a big house with a staircase leading from the ground floor up to the second floor. My room was directly in front of the staircase on the second level. I was around 14 years old and was so scared of my grandparents' house, as it was so massive and I always felt like it was haunted. So whenever I slept over, I would leave the door open. I had sleep paralysis a few times before this, and had trouble getting to sleep in fear of getting sleep paralysis. I could hear kids playing downstairs. It was only me and my grandparents in the house. I remember looking directly down at my feet, out to the staircase, and hearing laughing. Then I could hear footsteps running up the stairs, and I could see the head and shoulder of a young boy peeking up at me. So I closed my eyes because that's all I could do. Then I could hear the little footsteps come up the remaining steps and stop at the end of my bed. It was quiet for a few seconds, but then I could feel pressure on the end of my bed, heavy enough to be a little child around 5 to 6 years old. They walked up the top of the bed by my head, and I could hear the springs in the bed move with the pressure. Then they jumped to the side of the bed and made a thump. Then I could hear them running back down the stairs and laughing. I was 100% awake and aware of what was happening. I just couldn't move or scream. When I could finally move, I yelled out to my grandparents. My grandma came running into my room and I told her what happened. She didn't believe me and thought that I had just had a bad dream, but I didn't get to sleep the rest of the night. In December 1872, the De Gratia was sailing in the Atlantic Ocean and spotted what appeared to be an erratically moving and directionless ship. They got closer to investigate and eventually boarded the ship, only to find absolutely no one. The vessel seemed to be in fine working order, so the absence of the captain or any of the crewmen was puzzling. This ship was called the Mary Celeste and would go down in infamy as the ghost ship. Formerly named the Amazon, this ship was riddled with misfortune from the start, which leads many to believe it was cursed. Its first captain became suddenly ill and died before the first voyage had even been completed. It accidentally crashed into another ship and sunk it, and it was once left abandoned when its crew thought it was sinking, but later recovered and repaired. The ship eventually fell into the hands of Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, and in late 1872, it was to travel to Genoa, Italy. On November 7th, the Mary Celeste set sail with over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol. Captain Briggs embarked with his 7 crew members, as well as his wife and their 2-year-old daughter. Briggs had decades of experience, but this was his first time transporting the highly flammable and dangerous cargo. Nearly a month later, on December 5th, 1872, the De Gratia spotted the Mary Celeste about 400 miles off of the Portuguese islands of the Azores. Captain Morehouse of the De Gratia ordered his crew to approach and board the ship, only to realize that there was no one to be found. Upon further investigation, Morehouse and his crew couldn't find any signs of threats or any signs of emergency, which might cause 10 people to make an escape. Everything seemed to be in good order. The vessel wasn't damaged or sinking. There was a 6-month supply of food and water. All of the crew's belongings were still aboard, and most of the cargo was intact and secure. The last logged entry made by Briggs stated that on November 27th at 5 a.m., the weather had finally calmed. As the previous night, the ship encountered rough seas. There seemed to be no sense of worry or concern from the captain in the last entry. The final log also indicates that at the time that Morehouse found the Mary Celeste, the crew had already been missing for around a week. There were a few things awry, though. One of the 2 water pumps was not working, and the only lifeboat was gone. There was also a rope that had been tethered to the back of the ship, leading to speculation that the lifeboat could have been attached to it at some point. In addition, 9 of the 1,700 barrels of alcohol were empty, but these barrels were made of red oak, which is more porous, meaning that the alcohol could have just seeped out. Morehouse brought the ship to Gibraltar, where it was investigated and found to have not been involved in foul play. It was still seaworthy, and there was no indication of an emergency, which should have led a captain to order his crew to abandon ship. Morehouse was awarded 1/6 of the insurance that was covering the Mary Celeste. Throughout the years, many people have had theories as to what actually happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste. Some have far-fetched speculations that it was a giant sea monster that consumed the poor souls, but this is easily debunked because the ship was undamaged. Others think that maybe it was a pirate attack, but that wouldn't make sense because all of the crew's valuables, food, water, and the cargo were accounted for. If pirates had struck, surely they would have looted the entire vessel. Some theorize that the crew consumed the alcohol on board, became drunk, and this somehow led to their demise. It's important to remember that the cargo was industrial alcohol and not drinking alcohol. Briggs also ran a tight ship and didn't allow drinking on board to begin with. It's very improbable that all 9 adults became drunk and decided to abandon ship. However, there are some believable theories. Some think that Briggs just became very panicked and ordered his crew and family off. 5 days prior to the last entry, it had been logged that Briggs expected to see land, but hadn't. Research conducted determined that he was likely 120 miles off of where he was thought to be, probably due to faulty equipment. Perhaps the water pump had broken, the ship's hull began filling with water, and Briggs couldn't decide if the ship was taking on too much water to stay adrift. This, along with being off course and not seeing land, he began to panic, and he ordered his crew and family to board the lifeboat. Another plausible theory is that there were fumes from the cargo that were becoming too strong, and Briggs was growing anxious either for the crew's health or of an imminent explosion. Again, this was the captain's first time hauling this type of dangerous cargo, so it's not unlikely that he would have been nervous and uneasy. Perhaps he thought it was a good chance to air out the vessel since the weather had finally calmed. Though there's contradicting information as to if the doors, hatches, and windows were found closed or opened. Either way, if he was concerned due to the contents of the cargo, he may have ordered everyone into the lifeboat and tethered it to the back of the ship as to not float too far. Maybe the rope wasn't as durable as he assumed, or perhaps rough weather or choppy seas broke it, causing the lifeboat to drift off, unable to reach the ship again. Opinions and theories will continue for years to come, comparing evidence and trying to rationalize this long-lived mystery. There will always be unanswered questions, and it's unlikely that we will ever truly know what happened to the 10 members of the Mary Celeste on that cold November day. Back in 2015, my brother worked for a security guard hiring place. Not exactly sure what you call it. Basically, he'd call and they'd station him in some place or another that needed it. So this particular time, my brother got hired by the local cemetery. They'd had issues with kids sneaking in at night and messing things up, and at one point, they even broke a couple graves. Anyway, his job was just to drive around the cemetery and make sure no one was messing around. This area was pretty rural and at the time had a pretty bad stray dog problem. Dogs would get lost or people would drop them off and they would form packs and roam the countryside. On this particular night, my brother was in the cemetery and noticed a pretty big pack of dogs, about 8 or so, just wandering around and playing. There was a big Rottweiler, a couple of mixed breed dogs, and even a little Bichon Frise that was clearly someone's pet at some point because it still had a harness on. So my brother is doing his rounds, and he's driving really slowly with the window down. He has his arm out of the window with the spotlight, and it's pitch black at this point. Suddenly, he hears the dogs going crazy. And then he hears what he best described as the screaming bird from the swamp episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender, but deeper and more human-like, with a rattling sound mixed in like a rattlesnake's tail. The dogs go silent before starting back up again, barking and snarling a few minutes later. Then something fast and pale runs in front of his headlights, with the 8 dogs in pursuit, barking and snarling. He decides to follow the dogs in fear that they're getting ready to tear someone's pet to pieces. He parks his car, gets out with a spotlight, and then follows the sound of the barking. He then hears the scream again and swears that he heard a faint "help," mixed in with the weird screeching and rattling. He gets to where the dogs are going nuts and shines his light, and is surprised to see that the dogs have a deer. He said that this deer was a pale gray color. It was skinny and emaciated, and then he shined the light on its eyes. They're black, he said, but no light reflected off of them, and had no shine whatsoever. They looked like the eyes of something dead. He is understandably confused, and he's standing there, a few yards away from a pack of angry, snarling dogs that haven't even registered that he's there. The dogs have this deer surrounded and are taking turns nipping at its hind end and legs, but my brother notices that every time they do, they recoil and sort of gag, as if the taste is appalling to them. My brother then hears a deep growling from behind him. This big Rottweiler bowls past him and launches itself at the deer, grabbed its hind legs, and with a mighty shake knocks the thing over and just starts wailing on it. He then says the deer let out a screech again, and then it takes its hoof and swipes, yes, he said swipes, at the dog. The dog lets go and the thing takes off. The dogs are hard on its heels. He never did guard work at that cemetery again, but he did go back a few days later and managed to get that little Bichon Frise to come with him. And he's had that dog for the last 5 years. We live in Utah, and my Uncle Mark went on a mission at 19. They sent him to a Native American reservation in Arizona and paired him with a companion named Carl. When they first got there, there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on the reservation. Eventually, they came to a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. The reservation wasn't very big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night, they were trying to sleep when all of a sudden, their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and not sure what was happening, they climbed under the table for cover. Mark could distinctly hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, like a group of people. After about 5 minutes, it stopped. That next day, they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking the night before. The family got very quiet and told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange, but they didn't think much of it. The next night, it happened again. They woke up to their trailer shaking back and forth. Again, they climbed under their table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights. Anytime they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them they had to leave. Mark started thinking that due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them off the reservation. They'd then go into the convenience store and they were talking together about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said, "They can't talk about it. It's forbidden." Confused, they asked him, "Can't talk about what?" The guy continues to tell them about skinwalkers. He says that they are evil demons that were once Native American witches, and if they talk about it, the skinwalkers will come for their souls. They just walked out of there baffled. They thought it was another scare tactic. So that night, when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, flung it open, and yelled, "Hey!" But when he did that, he saw 3 animals run off. 2 were a wolf, 1 was a bear. As he watched them run towards the trees, all 3 of them stood up on 2 legs and walked slowly towards the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared him so bad that they called their mission president the next morning and asked to be moved. They were relocated that day. For a year, nothing happened. One day, they announced that Carl was being relocated to another city, and Mark was going to get a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for an hour to pick up Jimmy from the airport. The road they traveled went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at about 8 p.m. and met Jimmy, and then they go to leave. The mission president tells Jimmy, "We're driving through a dangerous area at night, so we can't make any stops. If you need to use the restroom, you need to go now." Jimmy says, "I'm fine." The mission president gets serious enough to even freak out Mark. "I am not kidding. Go do your business." Jimmy was insistent that he was fine, so they finally hit the road. As they were about 30 minutes into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries, and Jimmy starts complaining that he needs to pee badly. The mission president says, "We can't stop here. You'll have to hold it." Jimmy keeps going on, "I really can't hold it." So the mission president stops the car and says, "Okay, but you do your business next to the door. If I say get into the car, you better get into the car fast." With a look of confusion, Jimmy says, "All right," opens the door and starts to do his business. About 5 seconds later, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark start freaking out. "What's going on?" The mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. Then Mark sees something next to the car to his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer, and they were going 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept next to the car for 10 minutes until it finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. They didn't speak through the whole ordeal. And says, "What did I just see?" The mission president says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business." One night, years and years ago, I asked my mother if she had any stories dealing with the paranormal or with skinwalkers. She explained that she had, but this story she was about to tell me comes from her cousin, and perhaps is one of the most terrifying encounters I've heard. Her story begins one evening when she was asked by her grandma and mom to watch 4 of the younger kids while her mom and grandma went to visit a family member. The house they were staying at was her grandma's, which was a traditional hogan. Now the hogan had a rickety door made up of a long piece of floorboard and held together with baling wire and rope from the hay bales. The evening was quickly approaching. Her mom and grandma explained that they would be back within the hour, and they wouldn't be far, just a half mile down the road. Like most traditional hogans, the floor was made up of dirt, and a single stove in the middle that provided the heat and cooking for the household. As night fully approached, she had just put the kids to bed when she was waiting for her mom and grandma to return. She explained that it was getting really late and her mom and grandma hadn't yet returned home, so she made a fire to keep her and the younger kids warm. Then she said the dogs started wildly barking. Ignoring them and thinking that they had just spotted a small animal, she continued to wait. Like all reservation homes, they had no electricity, so light was provided by oil lamps and candles. She said she continued to wait by the oil lamp while the dogs continued to bark wildly. She then thought that she heard her mom and grandma coming, so she opened the door and peeked outside. Still no one was there, but the dogs who were still barking were now facing a nearby hill. Startled, she quickly closed and tied up the door, not wanting to draw any attention to herself. She dimmed the oil lamp and sat quietly next to the sleeping kids. Suddenly, the barking dogs began chasing something around the hogan. It must have circled around a few times, she said. Then, out of nowhere, she was hit with a strong odor of rotting meat, like an animal that had died out in the sun. Terrified, she said that she couldn't contain her fear, and she began to sob, waking the kids up on the bed. They asked her what was going on, and she told them to just be quiet and sit there. Finally, she saw approaching headlights slowly coming up to the hogan. Whatever this thing was noticed the headlights too and quickly jumped off the roof. She said after this encounter, all of the kids ran out of the house to their grandma crying. Some years later, she asked her mom what they saw that night. Her mom explained that they had lost track of time, and once they realized what time it was, they said goodnight and headed back home, bringing along with them their uncle who decided to stay with my grandma for the night. As they approached the hogan, they had noticed someone or something on top of the roof. It was a skinwalker, she explained, that its whole body was covered in white paint, and it wore a coyote skin on top of its head. As they got out of the truck, it jumped off the roof and ran up the hill, and before they knew it, it was gone. She also said their uncle chased after it, picking up an axe and quickly running up the hill to catch it. After the experience, my family sought out a healer, and he explained that it was indeed a skinwalker. He went to explain that it had ill intentions, and the reason it was on top of the roof was that it was going to drop down the stovepipe and kill whoever was in the hogan. He said that they were all lucky that her mom and grandma were pulling up when they did. If they hadn't, there was no way of knowing if the skinwalker would have gone through with its plan. My dad has had many run-ins with the entities of the dark from his childhood into his adult life. One story he told my little sister and me was when he was in his 30s. My mom and dad didn't have the best relationship when I was growing up, so my dad leaving for a period of time was something not out of the ordinary. During this one period, my dad had left and was staying with my grandma and grandpa. They had a little house close to the mountains, which was about 12 miles, maybe more, outside the city of Gallup, New Mexico. The story starts when my dad and his brother had to hitchhike into town to look for work and to help my brother sell his jewelry that he made. After a long day in town, they decided to head home since no one at the time had a home phone, and their only form of transportation was walking. It had been early in the evening when they finally arrived at the dirt road that led home. The sun was setting fast, so my dad and his brother picked up their pace, not wanting to walk home in the dark. As they were getting close to home, his brother began to walk faster. Wondering why, he asked him, "Hey, what's going on?" His brother looked at him with a stern look and answered, "Just keep up." Quickening their pace, my dad began to hear voices coming from the trees. Not wanting to look in the direction where they were coming from, they ignored the voices for as long as they could. Nearing home, my dad stopped and began to curse at whatever was stalking them. But then it was quiet. My dad stood there below the hill close to home with the unnerving quietness. He said that he could hear his heart pounding in his ears. Looking in the direction where he last heard the voice, he said, it whispered his name. After that, he and his brother bolted the last few yards home. As they ran, my dad could hear the mysterious creature behind them. With the sound of bare feet pounding on the ground and getting closer, they began sprinting even harder, finally making it to the front door of the house. Before bursting through the front door, they stopped and looked back, expecting to see something or someone behind them, but they saw nothing. So out of breath and adrenaline pumping, they looked at each other in confusion, wondering what the hell was going on. The house they were living in was a 2-room house which didn't have a lot of room for him and his 2 other brothers, so they had built a 1-room shed next door which they turned into a bedroom. They quickly made their way to the 1-room shed and locked the door. Exhausted from the day and being chased by whatever this thing was, they went to bed. Later that night, my dad woke up for no reason. When he tried to go back to sleep, he suddenly began to hear footsteps outside the shed right where his bed was. Sitting up, he listened as the footsteps went around the shed. Then something more terrifying happened. The strange being began making a dry heaving sound like it was hacking up something. He whispered his brother's name after a few minutes, and his brother whispered back and told him to ignore it and not pay attention to it and it would go away. As he laid back down, trying so much to ignore it, it would circle around the shed whispering him and his brother's name. Finally, after what felt like so many hours, it stopped. Bravely, my dad sat back up and strained his ears to hear if the mysterious creature had finally left. Taking one more look around the room, my dad noticed something from the corner of his eye. He saw a black shape staring through the window. It looked like a sheep's head, but the creature had hands, human hands, pressed up against the window. My dad shouted in Navajo, telling the creature it's not wanted here and to go away. The terrifying creature then stepped back and disappeared from his view. Sometime later, he had finally fallen asleep, and then awoke the next morning and told his mom and dad what happened. Recounting the experience to my grandma, they knew they had encountered a skinwalker. She told him to pray and bless himself with the smoke from the stove. This would be one of the stories my dad would tell us as a warning, never to be out after dark, or you would more than likely encounter a skinwalker. It was last summer. My girlfriend, now wife, and I finally made the big decision to move in together. Cobblestone Square is a situation of apartment complexes surrounding a center park. After living in another apartment for 2 years, I learned a bigger apartment was opening up on the other side of the complex. We needed bigger space because my wife had 2 children from a previous marriage. After a rushed inspection, we were happy to move in as June started. The months passed and the days grew shorter and colder. Autumn was drawing close, and with it, that's when the trouble began. In all the stories and movies, it starts out small. Things moving from place to place, lights being left on, etc. All chalked up to forgetfulness. This was true in our case, and we didn't think much of it. It only started to escalate with the children. Our apartment is set up with 2 bedrooms and baths on the opposite end of each other. In our bedroom, we have our own private bathroom, and next to the kids' room is a small hallway leading to their own bathroom. We would give them baths here and potty train, and almost as if flicking a switch, when the autumn months came, our youngest, a 2-year-old girl, would absolutely hate going into the bathroom. At the mere mention of bath time, she would go into hysterics. Or, on good days, she would sit in the bath, and in the process of bathing, she would look past myself and my wife and start screaming and crying. Oftentimes, something would catch her eye in the mirror, and she would also start crying like mad. The most unsettling part would be that as soon as we took her out of the bathroom, she would stop and act like nothing happened. Our son, who was 4 at the time, also would run up to us and say that he would hear a voice saying "uppy," which is a common saying among the children when they wanted to be held. We asked if it was his sister, and he would profusely say it wasn't her, but he did say it sounded like a kid. This happened a few times. With my wife being separated from her first husband and splitting custody, we would have the children come live with us every other week. On the weeks that the children would go stay with their dad, the activity would seem to die down, but that didn't mean it wouldn't happen. I asked my wife if she remembered anything from last year, and she recounted a time when we didn't have the children and she was cleaning the house. She noticed the kids' door was open. We usually keep it closed, but thought that maybe I went into the room for something. It wasn't until a while later that she used the kids' bathroom and saw that the door was open again. She found me in our room and asked if I opened it, and I said I didn't. With more incidents of lights being found on and doors opening, it all came to a head near the end of October when I was washing dishes in the kitchen. Above the sink facing the living room is a small window that allows someone in the kitchen to look out into the dining room and living room, and additionally the back door. After the kids had been put to sleep, my wife and I set about our nightly duties of chores to finish up before the next day started. As I was washing dishes, I looked up from the sink and saw in the glass of the back door a reflection of a large shadow in the hallway to the kids' bathroom. It quickly entered the bathroom, and I immediately walked over, turning on the light, and saw nothing there. I went to my bedroom where my wife was vacuuming, and I asked her if she by chance went into the kids' bathroom. I wasn't surprised by her response when she said no, and I told her what I saw. It was after this event, and subsequently Halloween, that all the activity seemed to stop. Months passed by again, and now we jump to 2020, August. As soon as the activity started again, I kept a journal of all of the findings. That way there was a record. On August 10th, I went to go to the bathroom in the kids' bathroom before going to bed and heard a small child giggle. Both children were fast asleep. August 11th, my wife was bathing our daughter, and in the first time in a year, our little girl started to shriek in fear until she was out of the bathroom. August 13th, while getting ready for bed, our son knocked on the door. I'm always the one to answer, and he told me that he was afraid. He wouldn't elaborate on what it was, but begged for the closet to be closed. The closet has never been a problem, and a few nights after this, we returned it to being open and haven't experienced anything like it again. August 15th, my wife and I had an argument, and I went to sleep on the couch for the night. As I was tossing and turning, I heard a child's voice in the night, "Uh-huh," as if answering a question. I forced myself to go to sleep. Both myself and my wife have caught our son speaking to himself. My wife told me that once she heard him saying, "Ow, stop it, you're hurting me." And when she went to go check on him, he was in the hallway by the kids' bathroom, holding his arm. During the daytime, the kids were playing and both me and my wife were doing our own thing. As I was sitting on the couch, our son runs behind it, stops, and then says, "And how would you do that?" Out of the blue. I turn to him and ask him who he's talking to, and after a moment's hesitation, he says, "Nobody." I told him I heard him say something, and he insisted that he didn't say anything. One occasion, my wife was sleeping on the couch, and in the middle of the night, she heard a man's whisper, "Don't get up," to which she promptly obeyed. It was the night after that I woke up from my sleep in the bed to see a shadow shape standing over me with red eyes. I felt as if it was going to hurt me. My wife and I have naturally begun our interest in the spiritual world. We began researching and looking for ways to go about this. We've purchased a Ouija board with no results, and from a medium, a supposedly haunted ring. If our apartment was going to be haunted, we wanted to know by who and with what intentions. It seems as if our mail order ghost has already made their home, as one morning our front door was unlocked and slightly ajar, nothing stolen. Tonight, as I write this, my wife and I were watching TV on the couch and decided to call it a night. As we went to our bedroom, I noticed a low scratching sound coming from the record player. I opened it up and saw that the turntable was moving as the needle was off its holder, turning the record player on. I replaced the needle and tried knocking the player a few times to see if it could have been easily bumped and knocked off, but no. The only way to move the needle was to pick it up with your fingers and set it down. I was reminded of one other time that this happened, long before we bought any haunted items. September 4th, after coming home from work, I noticed that the bathroom door was open. After we left it closed all day, and I even asked my wife if she went in there, and of course, she said no. At night, before bed, my wife stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring with eyes wide open. I asked her what the problem was, and she said that she heard someone slapping their palm against the sliding glass door. We investigated and found nothing. September 6th. My wife and I have a small collection of swords that we keep safely in our room. A few are propped up against the wall, being that we had no space. At 7:38 a.m., I woke up to a crashing noise, noticing that the swords propped up had fallen over. It could easily be dismissed as a slippery surface, but we had them in a way where they were firmly against the wall and have never fallen over before. September 7th, Labor Day. No surprise that this is the day we get the kids back, and immediately the activity becomes more rampant. With the day cold and rainy, we spent the holiday indoors and nothing to do but watch TV and eat. As we're doing this, I hear a thud come from the bedroom. Looking in, I see that a Toy Story Woody doll is on the ground. I received it for Christmas from my in-laws and put it on top of the bookshelf next to Buzz. Never has this fallen over, or at the very least, was unsteady. My wife mentioned how I left out another event from this last year that happened to her. She was quick to remind me that once when she was in the bathroom putting on makeup, she saw a face behind the door, almost as if peeking in. She turned and saw nothing. My sister-in-law is an employee at Best Buy and gave us the courtesy of purchasing a security cam for us. All updates will be posted. September 13th. With the installation of the camera, it seems that things have died down, which brings us a sigh of relief. We talked with our son, who's 5, and he told us that sometimes in his room, he feels as if someone is watching him, and not only that, but someone speaks to him. He told me that it sounded like a little boy whispering in his ear when he's laying in bed after we say goodnight. He says the voice says, "Time to go to sleep," every time that it speaks. I asked if he felt like it was going to hurt him, and he said no. This morning, as I typed this, he came rushing to the room and said he heard it again. It was the night before that I set up a microphone to record in the night. I've looked back on the recording and my findings are inconclusive. The children have a white noise machine going on in their room all night, which my son said is where he hears the voice coming from. I've checked the audio closely, and even at hours where the children are definitely asleep, it still sounds like there are full-on conversations happening between people. As of now, I can't make out anything they're saying, and as I understand, white noise machines are meant to mask peak noises, such as conversations from another room. It requires more attention to understand what's going on, but at least my son saying that he hears a little boy confirms my theory of having a ghost child in the home, whom I've heard twice. The week of the 13th through the 19th of September proved to be fruitless in our attempts at capturing any more audio or video. That was the week that we didn't have the children. We switched with their father on Sunday evenings. That being said, the past week of the 20th through the 26th proved to be quite different. The night of the 21st was eventful. We captured a series of events on the camera in the kids' room, and I'll list the timestamps. 8:18 p.m. My wife enters the room with our son to put him to bed. Absolute darkness. Not that the room is dark, but the screen is dark, and there is absolutely no audio. In between these times, my wife comes into our bedroom where I'm on the bed, getting ready to sleep, and she tells me that she heard the kids' door open while she was in the kids' bathroom cleaning. A voice whispered and said, "Mom?" She whispered back, "What?" and felt the clear presence of somebody standing behind her. She turned around and saw nothing. 8:22 p.m. The camera captures our son getting out of bed and leaving the room, where he tells us that he was having a bad dream. September 23rd, 3:14 a.m. Both the microphone setup and the camera capture our son getting up in bed and saying, "That's mine. No, that's mine." September 25th. This night was a big night. I would usually start the recording on the laptop and microphone after the children were fast asleep, but I was so tired myself that I fell asleep early before I had the chance to. The next morning, I noticed the door to the kids' room was open by a large margin. We have ingrained the idea of shutting doors into both kids' head, and even checking the camera footage, our son does take the time to close the door after leaving the room. He didn't get up again for the night. My wife stayed up later than myself and confirmed that the door was indeed shut. 1:25 a.m. Our son wakes up and notices either the door opening or the door being open, and promptly throws the covers over his face and goes back to sleep. September 26th, 5:20 a.m. A small tap is heard on our bedroom door. I figured it was our son, so I got up and opened the door, but nobody was there. 6:06 a.m. Our son comes to our door saying that he heard a voice saying, "Hey." I checked the mic, and indeed, before our son wakes up, there is the slightest whisper of "hey," and then our son begins to stir as if he's scared in his sleep and wakes up entirely. 8:59 a.m. While going over the recordings in the kids' bedroom, a few books on the bookshelf fell over. October 7th. It's been a while since I've come back and posted on this, and that's because the activity that's been happening has been nothing more than the expected phantom knocking. Nothing extreme, until last night. We bought for our kids 2 small pumpkins to paint, and we set them on the table out of the way, but this morning both pumpkins were off the table sitting on the floor. One was in the living room and one was in the hallway by the kids' room. October 8th. This morning, my wife said when she was getting ready in the bathroom, she heard what sounded like whispers coming from the bedroom. She looked out, expecting to see the kids, but nobody. Out of the whispers, she could make out, "There she is." I asked what it sounded like, and she said, "Like a little kid. That's why I thought it was ours." On the night of October 8th, we got in the mail a ghost sweeper, a device that sweeps through radio waves and can pick up EVPs. I was excited to use it when it charged, so after the kids were asleep and my wife was in our bedroom, I sat in the living room and held our mail-order ghost, Gloria, who was attached to the ring. Now to note, every time I hold this ring, I get a headache, and last night was no different. I turned on the sweeper and simply said, "Hello?" while holding Gloria. I cannot confirm what I heard, but I heard what sounded like a woman's voice say, "Hello?" back to me. I quickly asked more questions, but nothing more was heard. I decided to put Gloria on. She fits only on one finger, my left pinky, and then I went to bed. I usually fall asleep on my back and stay that way. Once in a while, I'll turn on my side, but last night I couldn't get to sleep until I rolled onto my left side, the same side Gloria was on. Anytime I laid on my back or turned right, I would wake up until I returned to the left side. It was interesting. I am thoroughly convinced my apartment is haunted. People die in them way too often to think it's not a possibility. And if nobody died here, the cemetery across the road definitely doesn't bring me any comfort. As I write this, I can say that two distinct entities can somewhat be accounted for. A small child ghost and something else. Or maybe something that wants to be viewed as a child. We still live here to this day, and autumn is just beginning. That's when things seem to really get interesting around here. Hi everyone, welcome to this collaboration. Included are a lot of talented narrators that deserve more attention than they receive. I'm going to have all of their information listed in the description box below. So go check them out, subscribe to their channels, and let them know that Aries sent you. And without any further ado, I hope you enjoy this collaboration, and happy Halloween! I know this sounds totally unbelievable, especially since it happened on Halloween, but I promise, this happened. Thinking about it now gives me the chills, and I can barely type this up. So it was what seemed to be a normal Halloween night, and me and my friend Cameron were very excited to be trick-or-treating. Naturally, we ran ahead of our parents and approached the house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Not completely relevant, but in this house lived a troubled boy named Cash. There were many rumors about him, that he shot his teacher with a BB gun, that he worshipped the devil, that he went to juvenile hall as a kid, etc. So there was a bit of an enigma around the house, but that didn't seem to scare us at the time. After all, we were so caught up in the hype of Halloween that didn't matter. All I remember is approaching the house and a nice lady opening the door. I remember being surprised that anyone even opened the door. Nonetheless, a really nice-seeming lady. After all, this was Cash's house. Next thing I know, we're in the house, and the door is closed. I don't recall ever deciding to go in the house. The main room to the house was very long and had purple lights illuminating it. We were then led into an elevator at the end of the room, where a pale-faced, gaunt, tall man, dressed in a tuxedo, wearing white gloves, stood in the corner, welcoming us in. We walked in and the door closed behind us, and I remember feeling like we had gone down several floors. The elevator was very dark, but I could tell we were somehow traveling downward in this one-story house. The whole time the man stood motionless in the corner, with his hands at his sides. Then the elevator door opened again, leading to a pitch-black hallway. At this point, I don't know what happened. All I remember is suddenly being outside the house, and our parents were freaking out, wondering where we had gone, and chastising us for going into a stranger's house. I don't know how long we were in there, but it seemed like we were there for only a split second. Yet, I distinctly remember this elevator going down, for at least what felt like several floors. How could this one-story house have an elevator? And who was that lady and that man? I have no idea what actually happened that day. Thinking about it gives me the creeps. I have never mentioned this to my mom or anyone else because it sounds so unbelievable, but I know that something was very out of the ordinary in that house.
I think it's finally time that I write this down. It's haunted me for years, but maybe this will help me move on. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself for what happened that night. I was 15. My girlfriend, her brother, my best friend, and I had come up with the brilliant idea to stay out all night on Halloween. We had the perfect plan. My friend Art, not his real name, and I would tell our parents that we were going to spend the night at Layla's and Will's, not their real names, house. Likewise, Layla would tell her parents that she and Will would be spending the night at my house. I know, it was stupid, but we were confident that our plan would work. I wish the plan had failed. That Halloween night, we'd set out feeling like total rebels. We'd all decided on a group costume, and each of us was dressed as a DC superhero. Will had dressed as Superman, Art was the Flash, Layla was Supergirl, and I was Batgirl. We were all pumped. We had the whole night to stuff our faces with candy, hang out, and do whatever we wanted to. After we'd trick-or-treated for about 3 hours, I'm not kidding, people started shutting their doors. By 12, there wasn't a single light on or door open. We 4 were the only people out on the street, and with the exception of a barking dog, there was no noise. Layla and I were bored, and I asked if we should just go home. Will refused. "You're at a sleepover at my house, remember? And I'm sleeping at yours. Do you want to be the one to admit to your mom that you lied?" "Come on, Will," Art spoke up. He'd been eating a lot of candy and had been pretty quiet for the last few minutes, likely battling a massive stomachache. "This isn't as fun as you said it would be. Maybe it'd be better if we just went home and told the truth. They'd be mad, but maybe we can still have an actual sleepover." Will looked at each of us and realized that he was the only one who wanted to stay out. He sighed and looked like he was about to relent. Then he looked behind us, and his face lit up like a jack-o'-lantern. "What's that?" he said excitedly, already beginning to move towards it. I turned around. Not 20 feet away was a house that I'd never seen before on our street. It looked like a typical townhouse. That's usually what you see in our neighborhood, but it was covered from porch to chimney with Halloween decorations. And not the cheap plastic ones you get at the dollar store, but the quality makes you want to run decorations that give kids nightmares. There were 2 disturbingly lifelike pumpkin-headed scarecrows guarding the front gate, and over 24 skeletons standing at attention in the front yard. Jack-o'-lanterns dotted the porch, each one with a face frozen in agony. A gigantic spider was perched in the show window, looking like it intended to make the shrub it was hovering over its next meal. Bones were scattered across the roof, as if someone had just dropped a handful of them from the sky, and, for the finishing touch, a spotlight hidden among the shrubbery made the entire house glow an eerie purple. Layla and I glanced at each other. How had we not seen this house earlier? Granted, we hadn't been paying close attention to every house we passed, but still, we'd been all over town. We'd have noticed a glowing purple house, right? I turned to ask Art, but he was just as entranced as Will. Before I could blink, he was running towards the house too. Once again, I glanced at Layla. She shrugged her shoulders as if asking what I expected from 2 Halloween-crazed boys. I grabbed her hand, and we ran after them. Up close, the house was even more disturbing. The scarecrows eyed us as we walked through the front gate. I tried not to gag as I passed them. Someone had certainly taken liberties to make the yard believable. The things stank like rotting pumpkins. I gripped Layla's hand a little tighter as we passed the skeletons. They must be from one of those expensive artisan websites, I thought. They sure didn't look fake. We walked up the porch steps, with Will shaking from excitement. Art's eyes were practically glowing. I remember wondering, half-jokingly, if they were in some kind of trance. Will rang the doorbell. It was the sound of a church bell and resonated throughout the house. "Trick or treat," we shouted dutifully, although Layla was practically crushing my hand. I was grateful for it. I needed to know that I wasn't the only one who found all of this unsettling. The door was practically thrown open. A gorgeous woman stood in the doorway. She had long legs, thick copper hair that stopped at her shoulders, black eyeliner, and blood-red lipstick. She was dressed in a revealing witch costume and grinned when she saw the four of us. Well, when she saw the boys. My, I didn't expect to be visited by two handsome heroes tonight. She gave a high-pitched giggle. Her voice reminded me of how ladies in old gangster movies talked. Art smiled and thanked her. Will was just staring at her. I took a step closer to Layla. That's when the lady noticed us. I think she knew immediately that we weren't as captivated as the boys were. Not by her house or her beauty. Sure, she was gorgeous, but she was an adult and I was already with Layla. Her eyes glazed over as she saw us, but her smile didn't waver. I noticed then that she was holding a bowl of candy. She slowly extended it to me. Candy, Batgirl. I wrapped both of my arms around Layla and took a step backwards from the lady. I could tell she wanted something and that it wasn't anything good. No thanks, we've eaten too much candy already. It wasn't a lie, we'd eaten half of our candy throughout the evening. The woman's smile wavered, and she blinked 3 times, as if it was the last thing she'd expected. I noticed something strange about her eyes. They were kind of cloudy. She turned and offered candy to the boys. Will took a full handful, while Art only took 2, obviously still suffering from a stomachache. I glanced again at the candy. The pieces weren't in wrappers, and it didn't look like any brand I'd ever seen. It sort of resembled malted milk balls, except bigger and lumpier. When the boys had finished their candy, the woman looked at the 4 of us. "You must be parched. Why don't you come in for some apple cider?" She gestured to the front door, which stood gaping open, like a mouth. Layla physically leaned away from the door. She wouldn't go in there for $1,000, let alone a glass of cider. I agreed with her. I forced a smile. "No, thank you." We turned and started to get down off the porch when I realized that Layla and I were alone. Will and Art were gone, and so was the woman. My heart rate tripled. They went in the house. My stomach hurt. Should we call the police? What could we say? That a pretty lady with a spooky yard had lured 2 boys into her house with apple cider? Even if that didn't sound crazy, we were 2 teenagers out past midnight on Halloween, not exactly what the cops would consider trustworthy. Plus, we couldn't prove that she wanted to hurt the boys. Still, we had to make sure that they were okay. We started walking around the house. On the left side, there weren't any windows. This made sense, though, it being a townhouse and all. The back of the house had a porch, but the windows and doors were all covered. The right side of the house yielded the same results as the left, leaving us only one option: the show window. We maneuvered around the skeletons in the yard and went as close as we dared up to the window. I, being dressed in black and thus harder to see, decided to look in the window, while Layla, dressed in bright red and blue, made sure the lady didn't come out of the house. Before peering in, I took an uneasy glance at the giant spider. Against my better judgment, I touched it. Solid plastic. I sighed and told myself not to be so jumpy. I peered through the window. I was staring at a lit fireplace. It seemed to be the only light source in the room. It was pretty dim in there. Still, I could make out 2 enormous armchairs on either side of the fireplace. I could make out Art's bright red Flash costume, and I could see the blue from Will's costume. They were both slumped in the chairs, as if asleep. There was a coffee table between the chairs, holding 2 half-empty glasses of what could only be apple cider. In the center of the room stood the lady. She was standing up as straight as a rod, her arms lifeless at her sides. Then, with no warning, her right arm shot straight up. She held it there for a second, then let it fall. A second later, she did it again with the other arm. Then, I swear, she started growling. As if this was a signal, Will and Art got up. I could tell that their eyes were closed, but they came right over to her. She put her left index finger on Art's forehead and her right index finger on Will's forehead, and she began to chant. Veneninum santiatum, age puer, languorem santias, nesico quomodo lantianam loqui ut alligent. All three of them suddenly began to convulse. Art went down, followed by Will. They both started to kick wildly. Then their kicks became weaker, as if they were losing energy. Then they stopped. I must have made a noise. Layla told me later that tears were streaming down my face. I must have sobbed without knowing it, because the lady turned around. Her eyes were completely blue, with no pupils to be seen. Her mouth was hanging open, with saliva the color of her eyes dripping from her lips, and her face was starting to melt. I screamed. Layla screamed. I shoved myself away from the window and landed flat on my back. The wind was knocked out of me, but I was too scared to care. Layla yanked me to my feet, and we just started running. We charged through the skeletons, which I now thoroughly believe were real. As we charged through the gate, I knocked over one of the scarecrows. Its head smashed to bits on the ground, revealing a human skull underneath. We ran, not knowing where we were going and not caring. We finally ended up in front of my house, and we both collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing. I told my mom everything. At first she thought I was making up a story to get out of lying to her, but one look at our faces and she knew we were serious. She called the cops immediately. When they investigated the strange house, they made a shocking discovery. It belonged to a Miss Smith, not her real name, who was a woman in her 20s and fit our descriptions, but she'd been on vacation in Alabama with her mother for the last 2 days. They never found their bodies. Art and Will remain missing to this day. The police don't believe our account of some life-sucking witch. They believe that a child predator drugged them and ran off with them. I don't think Layla and I ever really got over it. We broke up in 12th grade when she and her family moved away for a fresh start. A few months later, I moved too. We text now and then, but we aren't as close as we used to be. Still, I'm glad I've saved her number all of these years, because tonight I saw something that brought back that traumatic Halloween. A townhouse, bathed in purple light, with skeletons set up in the front yard. 2 of them guard the gate. One is dressed in a Superman costume. The other is dressed as the Flash.
Last month, it was my only child's 5th birthday, and one of the presents I bought for him was a build-your-own teddy bear kit from Target. I got it as a last present and thought that he would have enjoyed the Nerf gun, or the Avenger movies far more, but no. He enjoyed the teddy bear kit more than anything else. At first, he asked me to help him build it since he's only 7 years old, but as soon as I showed him the first step, he asked me in a kind, prepubescent voice, "Dad, I want to do it by myself, please." "Sure, it's your toy," I said as I walked out the door, which he speedily shut behind me. I thought nothing about it at the time, but he spent over 2 hours in there. Every time I tried to open the door, I could hear him get up and run over to block it. I originally thought it was cute for the first 2 times, but I became concerned with why he wanted to keep me out of his room so badly. So after the last time he kept me out, I decided to listen in on what he was doing in there. I put my ear up to the door, and I could hear my son's cute voice say, "There you go, Mr. Teddy. A great big nose for you." My heart got all warm and fuzzy when I heard this, because he really wasn't doing anything bad. But then I heard another voice say back to him, in a low, scratchy tone, "Someone's at the door, Tommy." What? Who could possibly be in there with him? I thought to myself as I swung open the door. As I did, my son was standing right there, far enough away that the door didn't hit him, but close enough that I thought it would. Jumping back a little due to how freaky he was, I looked about his room to see if he had any friends that snuck in to play with him. It was empty. Empty, except for a few toys that darted the floor. And there on his bed was the teddy bear. It was not at all what I would have had imagined a 7-year-old kid with no prior experience or help could have done. The stitching was even, and the buttons were so tightly knit in the proper place. I walked forward to it, about to pick it up as I said, "Wow, son, you really did a good—" "No! Don't touch him!" My son screamed as he lunged in front of my outstretched hand. Why can't I touch him? I just want to see how good you made him," I asked, perplexed. "He says he only wants to be held by me," my son said as he grabbed the teddy bear and held him close to his chest. This didn't seem weird to me at all at the time, because all kids at one point don't like you to touch their things, so I left the room. Behind me, the door speedily shut with a gust of wind that brushed up along my back. I decided to take a nap on the couch, and as I dozed off to sleep, the purring from our cat Snowball kept me awake. He was tucked away in the corner of the room, all curled up in a ball. "Huh? Snowy, what's wrong?" I said in a baby talk tone as I got up and walked toward her. The closer I got, the more she tried to back away into the corner, and I began to slowly lower my hand to pet her, but she nicked my finger with her claws, which she had never done before. I was wondering what had gone into her, until I noticed a large patch of fur missing that left a bloody red skin mark, as if something had skinned it off of her. I wondered how such a thing happened to her, and looked around the house to see if she rubbed up against something that might have peeled it off. That's when I heard the cat scream in agony from the living room. I darted as fast as I could to where she was, and another patch of fur was gone, which left her rolling crazily on the ground, rubbing her blood into the carpet. I quickly picked her up as she fought against me, but soon stopped as I gently petted the top of her head. My mind was spinning on what did this to her, so fast that I was unable to find them, or it as I ran over. I took her to the kitchen cabinet and pulled out some bandages after I had washed off the blood in the sink. She rubbed her head against my hand as I bandaged her up, and then let her go. However, she didn't stray too far from my side no matter where I went. I decided to see if anything was wrong with Tommy, and as I got to the door, I heard the same strange voice from before talking to my son, as if they were having a conversation. So I swung open the door and was traumatized to find that the teddy bear now had patches of the cat's fur stitched to him. Why? Where did you get those patches of fur?" I said as to trap him in a lie, as I tried to hold back the anger that enraged inside of me. "Mr. Teddy got them for me, Dad. He wants to be like a real bear and have fur. Look at how white beautiful the fur is. It's just like Snowball's." Tommy responded innocently as he brushed his hands across the patches of white blood-stained hair on the bear. I didn't know how to react, because the shock hit me so hard that I just stood there, wide-eyed, and muttered, "How did you get the hair off the cat?" "What do you mean?" "I didn't get them from the cat. Mr. Teddy told me he found them," Tommy responded as he stared at me with a face of pure innocence. I then replied sternly, "Are you lying to me, Tommy? Come look at what you did to the poor cat." I said as I put my hand on his back, and then saw that he was trying to bring the bear, and I responded by saying, "Leave that bear here." "No, Dad, he doesn't like to be left alone," Tommy responded as he squeezed it in closer. The more I thought about the fur being stitched to it, the more I became sick to my stomach. "Leave it, or you're grounded without the teddy bear," I said as I took it from his hands and tossed it on top of the bed. Tommy was sad, but when I showed him the cat, he seemed very upset. And the cat wasn't scared of him, as I thought she would be. "Look, the same fur she is missing is on your teddy bear. Can you please explain to me why this is?" I said as I pointed at the cat. "I don't know, Dad. Mr. Teddy went and got them and bring them back to me. I have no idea why Snowball has lost fur," he said as he held her tightly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, and when I turned my head, the bear was just staring at me, plopped down on the couch. "I thought I told you to leave that teddy bear in your bedroom," I muttered angrily. "I did leave him. I told you that he hates being alone," Tommy responded as he ran over and hugged the teddy bear, and as he did so, those button eyes never looked away from me. An eerie feeling ran down my spine, and I decided that I had had enough, and so I took the bear back to Target and asked what was wrong with this thing. The clerk just looked with a strange gaze and said, Sir, we don't sell those here. What do you mean you don't sell these here? I just bought this not too long ago, from here, I responded while gesturing to the bear. Sir, we have never sold that at our store. Take a look. We only offer pre-made teddy bears. No teddy bear kits. You should see if you got it from Build-A-Bear Workshop, the clerk said as he showed me all of the things that they sell under the category of teddy bears. I left the store perplexed on why they didn't sell it, and I decided to look online to see if I could find the brand anywhere else. I'm not going to tell you the name of the brand that was on the package, because I don't want you trying to find this devilish creation kit. However, I never was able to find anything more about it, and it was as if it never existed. I decided that it was some weird coincidence, and so I threw him in the garbage at the dismay of my son, who begged me not to do so. But I was not about to have something with bloody real fur stitched into it be in my house. When my wife Lisa got home that night, and we were lying in bed next to each other, I told her about what happened to the cat and everything else that had occurred. She got mad at me for throwing out the bear and said that it was not a teddy bear who did that to the cat. She got out of bed and stormed to Tommy's bedroom. I followed closely behind her, and when she opened the door, she let out a traumatizing scream as we saw the bear that I threw away, tucked under the covers, but his head was propped up on the pillow, staring at us. It had Tommy's eyes and ears stitched to its now sadistic, smiling face. It tore open the stitches from its twisted mouth as it muttered to us in Tommy's voice, "Wanna play with me?"
Our Baptism by As the Raven Dreams. Honestly, it didn't take long. I remember a time when we all thought it was so far off, that nothing like this could happen in our fragile lifetimes. Looking back, it's almost laughable. I've been spending my last few days watching videos of how things were. I found a box of DVDs with permanent marker written on them. I have no idea who the people in the videos are. They were filled with recordings of celebrations, birthdays, Christmas, New Year's. There was even one in the pile labeled Family Reunion. It's a bit strange to see that someone out there still put videos on DVDs. It's such an old way of doing things, but if nothing else, I'm grateful. It's been a pleasant escape from existence. Of course, the nostalgia has been putting some strange thoughts in my head. How did we end up where we are? How did we get forced into this situation? Sure, these thoughts are fruitless, but I've never been one for fruit, so I decided to entertain them. I feel like most people would say that we were apathetic, and that's what brought us here. At least that's what they would say if they weren't mostly dead. Maybe they'd be right. It's not hard to get wrapped up in your own life, uncaring of how everyone else is living. Why should I care if my neighbor 2 doors down the way had a bad day and decided to drunkenly take it out on his wife? Not really my problem. Some would probably also push that it was caused by politics, the never-ending squabbling between opposite ends of the same spectrum. More like 2 sides of the same coin, but I don't think it would have made a difference. Sure, the people voted for their leaders, others voted for who they wanted. Sitting here today, it doesn't really feel like the end of everything was partisan. Death is indiscriminate. It doesn't care who you voted for. It doesn't care what you considered wrong or right. Ironically, so are bombs, missiles, bullets. They all just kind of do their own thing. Now, if you were to ask me, I think it was ignorance. We did all we could to steer the country, the world, in the right direction. We were charitable to some extent. There was even a brief moment when everything was set into motion, where we loved our fellow man. Again, laughable. The sirens wailed, the skies lit up, the cities burned, and we wanted to help each other. By then it was too late. Everything had been set into motion. The steps chosen to start anew were already being followed. And with those 3 simple words, we would all meet our end. With those 3 simple words, we would get what we deserved. Our penance for our apathy, our fighting, the wars, the murder, everything our species had ever done. It was then that we were baptized by fire.
I don't think my dog is real. I know, this sounds completely bonkers, but hear me out. I've had my dog, Snickers, since I was maybe 7. She's a little terrier, about the size of a cat. She's always been pretty good as far as dogs go, though one time she ate an entire steak and cheese sandwich in the 2 seconds my dad was looking away from it. She's getting old, but still pretty playful. All in all, an ordinary dog. Until a few weeks ago. It all started at the beginning of the month. At around 8 p.m., I was walking up the stairs of my house, looking forward to finishing a sketch I'd been working on for the past few days. When I was about halfway up, I realized I'd left a book I'd been reading on the couch. I turned around and saw something that I'll never forget. Snickers was standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking at me, but she looked strange, almost pixelated. Then it got weirder. I can only describe it by saying she glitched. My dog froze for a moment, then jumped forward up 2 stairs, her pixelated eyes glaring at me. I didn't know what to do, so I just bolted up the stairs and into my room without looking back. The next morning, I forgot all about it, brushed it off as a dream, I guess. At least, I did until that afternoon. I was watching a TV show, I think it was Phineas and Ferb or something, with my sister, and Snickers was sitting on my lap. I was eating Doritos and my dog made it pretty clear she wanted some. I'm not supposed to give food to our pets when they beg, but I figured a chip wouldn't hurt. I was wrong. As soon as she snatched the cheesy triangle out of my hand, she went pixelated again. I glanced at my sister, but she was too absorbed in the show to notice anything else. When I looked back down at my dog, she was shaking. Then, as if nothing happened, Snickers went back to normal and munched her treat. It might as well have been my imagination. Instances like these kept happening on an almost daily basis for around 2 weeks. Every time no one else noticed, and once, it seemed like everything else froze except for the dog and I. Last week, her episodes started getting worse. Way worse. When she glitched, Snickers got this absolutely terrifying look on her face, and even though it was pixelated, you could tell it wasn't a face a dog should be able to make. I've barely been able to sleep since that face started making a regular appearance. This all brings me to 2 minutes ago, when I was playing Minecraft on my iPhone and sitting on the couch with my dog on my lap. It felt almost normal, at least until she hopped off my lap. Which brings me to the present. Snickers is standing on the floor, still as stone, about 2 feet in front of me. She's glitching worse than she ever has, and is so pixelated that if you didn't know she was a dog, then you'd have no idea what she was. Every few seconds she disappears and then reappears a few inches to the right or left of where she was standing originally. And the noises are awful. It's something between a bark and a scream, and it's piercing my skull. I don't know where they're coming from, because as far as I can tell, her mouth is closed tight. She's coming closer. Instead of going to the right or left, now she's coming forward. The rest of my family is outside. I'm alone in the house, frozen like a deer in headlights, terrified. She keeps coming closer. I'm in a relatively safe place right now, I think. So I'll update you all on what's been going on, though I'm not entirely sure I understand it myself. After what felt like an eternity of watching my dog slowly inch towards me, Snickers stopped moving. She wasn't blinking in and out of existence, and her face looked normal, besides the fact that it wasn't moving at all. Before I could have second thoughts, I jumped off of the couch and ran outside, hoping to find the rest of my family. I almost wish I hadn't found them. As soon as I stepped out the front door, I noticed something was wrong. Very wrong. My mother and father were sitting on the porch, and my 2 little sisters were playing with a football in the yard. But the football was frozen mid-air. My sister poised mid-dive to catch it. My mother's mouth was open in a silent laugh, with my father's subtle smile indicating he just told a joke. The trees surrounding our property weren't moving at all, even though I distinctly remember the weather forecast saying it would be windy. Not knowing what else to do, I pulled my phone out from the back pocket of my jeans to check the news. At first, my phone wouldn't turn on at all. I slapped it against my leg, hoping it wasn't dead. After an agonizingly long moment, my screen lit up. The familiar sight of the Apple symbol somehow calmed me down for a moment, until it suddenly switched to static. I stared in shock for a second or two, then tapped the screen, not knowing what else to do. In response, my phone let out a piercing shriek, causing me to throw the device across the yard on instinct. It only seemed to grow louder. I tried covering my ears while I scrambled for something to smash my phone with. My fingers brushed against a fist-sided rock, and I quickly raised it into the air and brought it back down on my phone, finally silencing the noise. My ears were ringing. I felt dizzy from shock and terror, and when I lowered my hands from my traumatized ears, they were covered in blood. Also, I had no way of contacting anyone, if there even was anyone to contact. I shuddered and pushed that thought away. I half walked, half crawled over to the open garage next to my house, deciding to grab a few essentials and then try to find someone who wasn't frozen. I quickly gathered some canned food and clothes from the boxes labeled donations and threw it all into an old backpack. At the last minute, I picked up the axe that was leaning against the wall of the garage. Then, my balance having mostly returned, I made my way up my driveway and started walking in the direction of my neighbor's house. Where I live, the houses aren't very close together, each one being about a quarter mile apart. It's not that far of a walk, but I still find myself wishing for the first time that we lived in a neighborhood, so I wouldn't have to be alone in my thoughts for an extended length of time, especially in the crushing silence that my world was enveloped in. As I walked, I saw a flock of blackbirds frozen mid-flight. I decided to quicken my pace after that. After maybe 15 minutes, I made it to my neighbor's house. The man who lives there, Harold, is nice, but a bit of a loner. When I broke my leg 2 years ago, he carried me home, even though he was in the middle of mowing his lawn. I cautiously treaded up the well-kept walkway and knocked on the front door, hoping Harold wouldn't mind the axe I was holding. When he hadn't opened the door after 5 minutes, I panicked. His car was in the driveway, so I knew he was home. I circled the house, peering through windows as I passed them. After a few minutes of this, I reached the last window. I quickly glanced in and almost didn't see Harold at first. He was sitting on his couch, bolt upright, staring right in front of him, from my perspective to the right. I turned my head to see what he was staring at and saw a television. It was displaying the same awful static that my phone had. Since I didn't want to hear the ear-spinning noise again, I got out of there as fast as I could. I was feeling terrified and at loss. There wasn't anyone else nearby for miles, and I had no means of transportation. Or did I? I sprinted towards Howard's car and tried the door. Luckily, Howard was a trusting sort of person, so his car was unlocked, and the keys were in the glove compartment. Being a newly minted 16-year-old, I didn't have my license, and I hadn't had the time to take a driving class yet. But my father had been taking me to empty parking lots on the weekends to practice, so I had a vague idea of what I was doing. I tossed my axe onto the passenger seat, started the car, and backed it down the driveway, letting out a held-in breath when I was on the road. Thankfully, barely anyone ever drives down my street, and considering the situation, I didn't think I'd be in danger of being pulled over. I slowly drove down the long street, taking care to keep my eyes on the road like my father taught me. After an hour or so of my snail's pace of driving, I reached the end of the road and turned onto a busier street. There were a few cars stopped in the middle of the street, but I avoided them pretty easily. I considered exiting Harold's car, but decided against it when I noticed the people inside were all as still as stone, like everyone else. Driving down the street was eerie, to say the least. After another hour or so, the car made a clanging noise, shocking me. I hadn't heard any noises besides the engine's purr in several hours. The car made a screeching, scraping noise and then stopped. The engine turned itself off and all the lights on the dashboard went dark. After a moment of hesitation, I stepped out of the car and popped the hood open, but quickly realized I had no idea what to even look for. It was unseasonably cold out, even though the sun's position in the sky hadn't changed since this afternoon, so I went back into the car. I decided to get a few hours sleep, but I wanted to search the car first to see if there was anything useful inside. I found Harold's phone in the center console and tried to turn it on. For some reason, it worked like a normal phone, though the clock is frozen. That brings me to right now. I'm typing this with the hope that someone, anyone, will see this and explain what's going on. The screen's starting to get static.
House Sitting, written by Reddit user Certain Shadows. My eyes flew open when a hand clamped over my mouth. "Don't move," the man leaning over me commanded, a knife glimmering in the darkness. A surge of fear jolted through me. Without thinking, I thrust my hand upwards into his face and felt my palm meet his nose with a revolting crunch. When he howled in pain, I hurled myself out of bed and dove into the adjoining bathroom. I slammed the door shut and turned its lock only seconds before he smashed into it. "Get out of there," he shouted. Heavy battering thuds shook the door. "Take whatever you want and go," I yelled back. "I won't call the police. I swear." He fell silent. I held my breath anxiously. For a fleeting moment I thought he was gone, only for my stomach to drop when I heard the sound of the knife's blade gouging into the wood. I realized that he was trying to carve his way through to me. "Please stop. This isn't even my house. The Day family hired me to stay here while they're on vacation." Suddenly, I was struck by a strong scent of rubbing alcohol. I looked down to see clear liquid spreading beneath the door and across the bathroom tiles. "You have only 10 seconds to come out," the man said. "If not, I'll light this match." A dizzying wave of terror washed over me. I gripped the sink to keep from falling. 10, 9. My eyes frantically searched the room for anything to defend myself with. 8, 7, 6. I felt as if I were being torn in half by an excruciating decision. Accept whatever violent fate awaited me outside the door, or perish in a fiery blaze. 5, 4, 3. I flung open my door. The man raised his knife, and I emptied the contents of a hairspray canister into his eyes. He screamed in agony as I pushed past him and ran. I made it to the staircase before he grabbed me by the hair and threw me to the ground. His poisoned eyes were a furious shade of inflamed red. "I'm gonna kill you," the man hissed. He lifted a foot to stomp on my head, but his polluted vision slowed him and gave me enough time to deliver a swift kick to his knee. He lost his balance and stumbled backwards. By the time he realized he was falling, it was already too late. He plummeted down the stairs and landed in a bloodied, broken heap. As I approached the man's crumpled body, I noticed a small blinking light fastened to his chest. Confusion dawned on me when I realized he was wearing a camera. I nearly jumped when his phone began vibrating in his pocket. An unknown number. I answered it silently when a familiar voice spoke into my ear. "Is he dead yet?" Mr. Day asked excitedly. "I can't wait to see the footage."
Everybody's heard of Smokey Bear, but probably few remember Charcoal's cub. In 1990, there was a small forest fire in Waldo County, Maine, burning about 10 acres of wilderness. When the smoke settled, firefighters found the charred remains of a bear cub. For some reason, the city councils of the various towns in the county got together and decided that this gruesome tragedy was a perfect PR opportunity. Or maybe they were less cynical than that and were genuinely concerned about raising wildfire awareness. Whatever their motives for creating Charcoals, the character was a total flop. For several reasons, but mostly because a superior, iconic version already existed with Smokey. I remember attending a Cub Scout meeting at the time where Charcoal's cub made an appearance. Right after the raffle, this guy crawls up on stage in a really ratty-looking bear costume. I think it might have been an old hand-me-down from UMO, where the mascot is a black bear. For some ill-conceived reason, Charcoals was wearing a fucking diaper. I guess to signify that he was a cub. Charcoal spoke in a muffled voice. Somebody had to tell him to speak up, so he had to shout, but we could still barely hear him.
"Don't play with fireworks in the woods, kids. You'll burn it all down."
Smokey has a shovel. Charcoals, bizarrely, had a garden hoe. Needless to say, we didn't see much of Charcoals, and then we didn't see him at all. Until last week. My wife Shelley was due to give birth in a month, and I wanted one last hurrah before buckling down with an infant to take care of. I set things up with my childhood buddies, Lyndon and Terry. We were scattered across the country now, but decided to get back to our roots for a week-long expedition in the Maine woods. Hiking, canoeing, fishing, camping, and drinking. It started out as such an awesome experience. In fact, we were sitting around the fire, downing beers, when I told my friends about how much I was enjoying myself. "This is great," I said. "It's just so pure, you know? You know what? I'm going to see if Shelley will move back here. It's such a great place to raise a kid, don't you think?" Lyndon popped the cap off of Sam Adams with his lighter. "I don't know, man. I like it in the city. I mean, yeah, this right here is awesome. But I remember getting so bored. When I have a kid, yeah, we'll do this sometimes. But there's so much shit that you could just walk to from my apartment. Museums, parks, good food." "True," I said. "What about you, Terry? You like it out in San Diego?" "Love it," said Terry. He started packing a bowl. "Fuck winter, man. Fuck shoveling snow and all that. And then you step outside and your dick shrivels up into a toothpick." "True," I said. We passed around the bowl and thought it over in silence, so it was easy to hear the rustling coming from the woods around us. "Did you guys hear that?" asked Lyndon. "Sounds like something big." The rustling got closer. "Probably a deer?" I said. Terry pulled out a cigarette and lit it. Then we heard a voice shouting from the thicket, sounding rough and raspy.
What are you dumb motherfuckers doing?
We all bolted to attention. "What the fuck?" said Lyndon in a hushed voice. "I thought this was part of the park. We're not doing anything illegal here, are we?" "No," I said. "We're fine." Then I raised my voice. Hello? Who's there?"
You dipshits. You gonna play a game of match throwing next? So you can burn down the forest the fastest.
"What's this guy's problem?" said Lyndon. "You think we've got a nutcase here? What if he tries to attack us?" I got the flashlight from my pack and saw Lyndon rummaging through his. He pulled out a big knife we'd bought for the trip. I shone the light in the direction I thought the voice was coming from, and a moment later I saw it emerge from the woods. It took some time for my brain to process what I was seeing. Standing there at the edge of the thicket was an old, ragged black bear. Patches of his fur were missing, like he had hundreds of thousands of ticks living on him all the time, sucking his blood. When I saw the diaper and the hoe that he was holding, it finally clicked. Tara started laughing. "Holy shit, it's Charcoal's cub, all grown up. Oh man, that's a good one, dude." Charcoals took a step forward. He looked so lifelike, but it had to be a costume, right?
About time for you boys to call it a night, huh?
Said Charcoals in a tired voice.
You idiots do know the proper way to put out a campfire, right? Or were you planning on getting drunk, passing out, and letting the thing smolder all night until a gust of wind comes along and poof? Hasn't rained for 2 fucking weeks here. Did you jackasses know that, huh? Do you even know what the current fire threat level is? It's fucking extreme, you assholes. It's fucking all the way in the red.
"Okay, man," said Terry. "That's a good bit. I'll give you that. But this is kind of a private party, so why don't you move along to the next camp, huh?" Charcoals took another step forward. I saw that he was missing an ear.
Tough guy, huh? Won't be so tough when I hold your face in the flames. See how you like it. This is your last chance. Put out that fire, and your fucking cigarette too, or I'll put you out.
Terry stood up. He always had this temper. "Terry?" I said. "Relax." But it was too late. "Fuck off," said Terry. Then he flicked his burning cigarette at Charcoals. The cherry hit Charcoals' chest and I saw a small puff of smoke as his fur singed. Everything was deathly quiet for 3 seconds. Then Charcoals spoke in a low growl.
"Pick that fucking thing up,"
he said,
"and shove it up your ass. You do that, and maybe I'll let you go."
"All right," I said, standing up. "Everyone needs to take it down a notch. Terry, apologize to the man." Terry looked at me in fury. "Me? Apologize to him? He's the one who came stomping into our campsite causing trouble." I sighed. "Just say you're sorry, dude, please." Terry turned to Charcoals. "I'm sorry," he said. "Sorry you're a pathetic fucking loser with nothing better to do than stomp around the woods ruining everybody's fun." Charcoals took yet another step forward.
"Last chance, bucko. I want to see the glowing end of that cigarette disappear into your asshole."
"Jesus," said Terry. "Get the fuck out of here, I'll stomp your ass. This is your last chance." Charcoals moved with a quickness that I was not expecting. He leaped forward and then had Terry by the throat, lifting him in the air. Terry was kicking his legs in the air, gasping for breath. Whoa, put him down! Lyndon shouted. Chuckles didn't put Terry down. He carried him over to the fire and shoved his face into it. The night was filled with screams, and the sickening smell of Terry's face roasting, and the hair on Chuckles' paw singeing as he held them both to the fire. Please! I screamed helplessly. I watched as Lyndon jumped on Chuckles' back and began stabbing him again and again with the knife. Chuckles roared and let go of Terry, who jumped back from the fire and then started writhing around in unbearable pain. His face looked like it had melted. Chuckles reached out with one hand and easily flung Lyndon away. Lyndon scrambled to get to his feet, but Chuckles was faster. He swung the business end of his hoe at Lyndon's head. It connected with a thunk, and then Lyndon wasn't moving. Chuckles turned slowly to look at me.
How about you? You got any insight to add?
No, sir, I said.
You gonna go ahead and put that fire out?
Yes.
Properly?
Asked Chuckles. Yes.
Tell me how, you knucklehead. Tell me exactly how you're gonna put that fire out.
Drown it. Stir it. Feel it.
Oh, you did not just quote that fucking hack-ass fancy boy smoking fuckface to me. I know I must have misheard you, but yes, do that right now. And if I see one wisp of smoke rising up here, I will come back and end you. Are we clear on that? Crystal clear?
Yes, I said.
Good. You assholes got off easy, you know. I just want you to know that. I'm getting soft in my old age, I guess.
I looked at Lyndon's unconscious and bloody body and Terry's disfigured face. He was also not moving now, having passed out from the pain. I started putting out the fire as Chuckles lumbered back into the forest.